Elias Vargas stood on the weathered dock, the chill of the Adriatic breeze tugging at the collar of his dark overcoat. Around him, the city was awakening to the crescendo of the masquerade festival, a spectacle of color, sound, and shadow playing out beneath a pale, cloud-streaked sky. He adjusted the simple black mask concealing his features, its matte finish dull against the glimmering sea of ornate Venetian disguises. Faces adorned with gilded filigree, feathered plumes, and jewel-encrusted visages drifted past him, laughter and snippets of foreign tongues swirling in the air like smoke. Yet beneath the revelry lurked an undercurrent of menace and intangible tension Elias felt deep in his bones. The assignment had landed on his desk only hours earlier, transmitted through secure channels with little fanfare. A killer was on the loose, one who did not merely hide behind a mask but wore a different face each night. 13 nights of the festival, 13 faces, 13 murders. The rules were as cryptic as they were deadly. Each midnight, the killer shed an identity like a second skin, vanishing into the crowd with chilling ease. And Elias's task was clear: unmask the phantom before the cycle ended. He moved through the bustling streets, his gaze sharp, cataloging faces, noting patterns in the chaos. The city's veins pulsed with life and secrets. Vendors hawked spiced wine and sugared pastries. Musicians played haunting melodies on violins and accordions. The scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with the salt and decay of the canals. Yet every smile was a mask hiding unknown intent. At a grand palazzo on the edge of the piazza, Elias found himself ushered into a dimly lit chamber. Rich tapestries muffled footsteps. Candles flickered, casting long shadows that danced like specters on the walls. Across from him, a figure draped in black spoke with quiet urgency. "The masquerade is no mere festival," the voice intoned. "It is a crucible of identities where truth dissolves into illusion." The killer exploits this fluidity, slipping through the cracks of perception. Elias absorbed the briefing with a practiced calm, his mind racing beneath a veneer of stoicism. The rules were strict: no direct assaults, no public disturbances. The investigation had to unfold within the delicate balance of the festival. The killer thrived on anonymity, and every mask was a potential threat. As the session ended, Elias was introduced to two key figures. First, Livia Cantia, a striking woman with dark, cascading hair and eyes that gleamed with intelligence and something unreadable. Her mask was a marvel of black lace and onyx beads, framing her face like a dark jewel. "Venice is my home," she said softly, "and this masquerade is both a blessing and a curse. I will help you navigate its shadows, but be warned, loyalty here is as shifting as the tides." Then came Marco Bellini, a rugged man with a stubbled jaw and weathered features born of years walking Venice's less glamorous streets. His plain clothes and skeptical glare set him apart from the lavishly masked attendees. "I don't trust outsiders," he muttered, "but this killer is bad for the city. We'll have to work together for now." The uneasy alliance was sealed with a nod. Later, as dusk bled into night, Elias stepped onto the balcony overlooking the piazza. The festival was in full swing. Lanterns swung gently in the breeze, casting golden pools of light over the throng below. Music swelled, a raucous mix of laughter and whispered conversations. Masks gleamed, some grotesque, some elegant, all enigmatic. He scanned the crowd, studying how people moved, how eyes darted beneath their disguises. The killer was here, somewhere among them, watching, waiting to strike again. The thought tightened his chest. A sudden ripple passed through the crowd as a figure in a raven-feathered mask brushed past him. Elias caught the woman's intense gaze, Livia's, and felt a shiver of both reassurance and doubt. In this city of shadows, he knew the only certainty was uncertainty. The first midnight approached, and with it, the first unmasking. The game had begun. Elias inhaled deeply, steeling himself. In Venice, where every identity was a lie, survival depended on seeing through the masks before the killer chose his next face. And the clock was already ticking. The early morning haze clung stubbornly to the narrow alleys, blending with the stale smoke of torches flickering along the canal walls. It was here, amid the labyrinthine veins of Venice, that the first murder had been discovered, a grim harbinger of the nightmare to come. The scene was still cordoned off by a tattered velvet ribbon, swaying faintly in the breeze like a delicate noose. Elias crouched beside the body, the victim sprawled awkwardly, his mask a delicate porcelain visage painted with intricate gold leaf-lying face down in a pool of darkening blood. The stillness of the city, usually alive with the lively chatter of festival-goers, was broken only by the distant splash of oars and the soft murmurs of onlookers. Elias's piercing gray eyes scanned the surroundings with methodical precision. The victim's clothing was finely tailored, suggesting a man of some standing, but the mask was the true mystery. It was one of 13, Elias recalled, each tied to a night in the masquerade festival and now, chillingly, to a series of murders. The killer, it seemed, wore a different face every night, disappearing into the throng as easily as mist over the canals. He rose slowly, brushing dust from his dark coat, and pulled his own mask tighter against the chill. The silence was broken by the soft footsteps of Marco Bellini, the local detective who had been assigned to assist him. Marco's rugged face was set in a scowl, his eyes tired but alert. "A fine mess," Marco muttered, gesturing toward the body. "No witnesses, no clear motive. Just a mask and a dead man." Elias nodded, his mind racing through possible leads. "The mask is deliberate. It's a signature. The killer wants us to know that each death is connected, but the identity remains elusive." Marco's gaze hardened. "And every night, a new face. How do you catch a ghost?" Before Elias could answer, a voice drifted from the shadows of a nearby tavern. Sophia Marini emerged, her sharp eyes glinting beneath her own mask, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "You'll find more answers over a drink than on these cursed stones," she said softly, beckoning them inside. The tavern was a stark contrast to the cold, empty streets. Warm light spilled from stained glass, casting kaleidoscopic colors across the worn wooden tables. The hum of whispered conversations and the clink of glasses created a bubble of uneasy camaraderie. Sophia moved deftly behind the bar, leaning toward Elias as she spoke. "Masks hide more than faces here," she murmured. "Rumors twist and turn like the canals. I've heard whispers, names that come and go like shadows. But trust is scarce, everyone has something to hide." Elias absorbed her words, the weight of the masquerade pressing down on him. The killer's ability to assume new identities was not just a tactic but a weapon, fracturing reality and shattering trust. Every smile could conceal a blade, every glance a lie. Later that night, Elias and Marco stood by the edge of a narrow canal, the water reflecting the flickering gas lamps like liquid gold. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air as they exchanged terse observations. "You're not used to this, are you?" Marco said quietly. "The city, the masks, the lies." "No," Elias admitted. "But I've seen enough ghosts to know they leave trails. We just have to find the right one." The investigation advanced as Elias pored over photographs, victim profiles, and the scattered masks recovered from the scenes. Each mask was a puzzle piece, hinting at a pattern that was maddeningly incomplete. The ticking of a distant clock echoed through the quiet room, a relentless reminder of the 30 nights to come. Working late into the night, Elias's thoughts churned. The killer's pattern was emerging, a new mask each evening, each death a calculated stroke in a deadly game. Yet the faces behind those masks remained shadows, impossible to pin down. His gaze lingered on a photograph of the first victim, the porcelain mask beside him like a silent accusation. The question gnawed at him. How do you catch a killer who is no one and everyone at once? As dawn threatened the horizon, Elias leaned back, exhaustion tugging at his limbs. Outside, Venice stirred, the masquerade's music swelling once more. Somewhere in the crowd, the killer was already wearing a new face, ready to vanish into the night. And Elias had to find him before the next mask claimed another life. The night was far from over. The establishment was a stark contrast to the glittering opulence of the masquerade above. Here, shadows clung to the corners, and the air was thick with the scent of aged oak and spiced wine. The soft glow of candlelight flickered across Sophia's face as she leaned toward him, her sharp green eyes scanning the room before settling on his. "You're looking for truths in a sea of masks," Sophia murmured, her voice barely more than a breath. "But be careful, agent. Here, truth is just another disguise." Elias nodded, settling onto a stool at the bar. Around them, figures cloaked in elaborate costumes whispered secrets and lies, their faces obscured by delicate Venetian masks. He knew the danger. Every whispered rumor could be a trap, every glance a threat. "Tell me what you've heard," Elias urged, his voice low. Sophia dipped her head, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. "There's talk of a ghost someone who wears a different face each night. They say he moves like smoke through the crowds, impossible to catch, but the whispers. They're fragmented, conflicting. Some say the killer's among the nobility. Others swear it's someone from the streets." The contradictions gnawed at Elias. The masquerade's fluid identities were his greatest obstacle. How could he pin down a killer who was not just hidden behind a mask, but changing masks nightly? Later, stepping out of the bar, Elias was swallowed by the Venetian night. The narrow alleyways twisted like veins through the city, moonlight casting long shadows that danced with the rippling water. Masked figures passed silently. Their faces were blank canvases, impossible to read. The soft lapping of the canal water was the only sound accompanying Elias's footsteps, a haunting counterpoint to the turmoil inside his mind. He paused, watching as a figure slipped behind a corner, vanishing as if into thin air. His breath caught. The killer was here, somewhere among these shadows, a phantom weaving through the city's heart. The next evening, at a private gathering hosted by Venetian nobility, Elias found himself face to face with Livia Conti. Her presence was magnetic dark hair cascading over an intricately decorated mask, eyes shimmering with intelligence and something more elusive. "Information is currency here," Livia said softly, swirling wine in her glass. "But every coin has two sides, Elias. You must decide which side you are willing to pay." Her ambiguous loyalty unsettled him. Was she a genuine ally or another player in the masquerade's dangerous game? Elias met her gaze steadily, aware that every word exchanged might be a piece of a larger puzzle or a carefully laid snare. Back in his rented room overlooking the canal, Elias sat by the window, the city's lights twinkling like distant stars. The ticking of an old clock filled the silence, each second a reminder of the time slipping away. His reflection blurred in the glass, merging with the masked revelers outside. He felt the fragmentation of his own identity, the lines between hunter and hunted, friend and foe, reality and illusion dissolving beneath the weight of the masquerade. The night pressed on, and with every passing hour, Elias's sense of paranoia deepened. He was a man caught beneath layers of masks, his own included, struggling to find a single truth in a world built on deception. The killer was out there, slipping through the cracks of shifting identities, and Elias knew that with every mask that fell at midnight, the danger grew sharper, the stakes higher. But who could he trust? And how long before the masks concealed the killer forever? As the clock chimed midnight, Elias felt the cold grip of isolation tighten. The game had only just begun, and beneath the mask, the shadows were already closing in. Inside a modest room perched above the narrow cale, Elias Vargas sat hunched over a battered wooden desk, the faint scratch of his pen against paper the only sound breaking the stillness. The masquerade outside throbbed with music and laughter, but here, in this small sanctuary, the festive veneer dissolved into shadows and memories. He paused, eyes darkening as they settled on a photograph pinned to the wall, a faded black and white image of a man with a tight-lipped smile, standing shoulder to shoulder with Elias in a long-forgotten mission. The man was his colleague, his friend, lost in the chaos of an operation that had gone catastrophically wrong. The weight of that loss pressed down on Elias with relentless force, a silent companion in his solitary vigil. The mission in Venice was unlike any other, a killer who wore a different face each night, blending seamlessly into the swirling anonymity of the masquerade. Yet, as Elias contemplated the task ahead, the past surged forward with unyielding clarity. He knew that the shadows he chased in the present were intertwined with those haunting memories. His secure phone vibrated sharply against the desk, jolting him from his reverie. The screen glowed with an encrypted message, its contents brief but loaded. "The 13th mask knows you. Past and present entwined, watch the shadows you cast." A cold shiver crawled down Elias's spine. He read the message again, the cryptic words reverberating through the silence like a death knell. The killer was no mere stranger. This was a game played on a personal level, with stakes far beyond the immediate murders. The room seemed to close in around him as memories flooded backflashing images of that fateful night. The screech of tires on wet pavement, the frantic crackle of radio static, and the sudden, horrifying absence when his colleague vanished into the darkness. The operation had been a disaster, a failure that Elias had buried deep beneath layers of professional detachment and restless nights. But now the past was clawing its way to the surface, refusing to remain hidden. Every mask the killer wore was a reminder of the faces Elias had failed to save, the truths he had never fully confronted. Determined to seek clarity, Elias reached for his phone again, calling Alessandro Fiore, his former colleague and trusted confidant. Though miles away, Alessandro's steady voice offered a tether to reason amidst the turmoil. "Elias," she answered, her tone cautious yet supportive, "I got your message." "What did you find?" He hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "The killer's connected to that night. To my past, it's not just a case of masks and murder anymore, it's personal." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "I feared as much. We need to dig deeper. There's more beneath the surface of this masquerade than anyone realizes." The conversation was brief, but it ignited a spark within Elias. He knew that despite the emotional barricades he had erected, he could not face this alone. Yet trust came at a cost, and his guarded nature wrestled with the necessity of alliance. Later, walking through the silent streets as dawn threatened the horizon, Elias's thoughts churned. The city around him was a maze of secrets, and each turn seemed to echo the fragmented pieces of his own identity. He wondered how many masks he himself wore, and whether unmasking the killer would also mean confronting the shadows within. As the first light of day softened the edges of Venice, Elias steeled himself for the nights ahead. The ticking clock of 13 masks was relentless, and the killer's game was growing deadlier by the hour. But it was not only a battle against an elusive foe, it was a fight for redemption, for truth, and for the fragile self he feared was slipping away. The masquerade was only beginning, and Elias was trapped at its heart, caught between the ghosts of his past and the deadly faces of the present. The shadows whispered secrets, and Elias knew one thing with chilling certainty: the next mask to fall would change everything. He paused at a bridge overlooking a canal, the water dark and still beneath the rising sun. Somewhere in the city, the killer moved unseen, wearing a new face, weaving lies into the fabric of Venice. Elias's breath fogged in the cool morning air as he vowed silently this time he would not fail. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about confronting the man he had become and the man he had lost. And the clock was ticking. Elias Varga stepped through the carved wooden door, the weight of his mask pressing lightly against his face. The scent of jasmine and aged oak filled the air, mingling with the faint trace of expensive perfume. His eyes, sharp beneath his dark mask, scanned the room where Venetian nobles and masked guests mingled beneath towering frescoes depicting mythic tales from centuries past. Near the marble fireplace stood Livia Conti, an embodiment of elegance and enigma. Her dark hair cascaded in waves, framing a face partially obscured by an intricate silver mask adorned with filigree and tiny sapphires that caught the low light like stars. Her eyes, vibrant and calculating, met Elias's gaze with a mixture of recognition and guarded caution. "Agent Varga," she greeted, her voice smooth but carrying an edge of tension. "I trust Venice has welcomed you with the usual charm." Elias inclined his head slightly. "The city is as beguiling as ever. But beneath the masks, the dangers are far more tangible." Livia's smile was fleeting. Indeed, the masquerade is a dance of shadows, and some steps lead to darker places than you might imagine. Their conversation was interrupted briefly as Marco Bellini entered, his rugged frame framed by the doorway. His presence was understated yet commanding, a silent reminder of the gritty reality tethering Elias's world to the polished veneer of Venetian high society. Together, the trio navigated the labyrinthine halls to a more private chamber, where the flickering candlelight softened the sharp edges of their alliance. Livia's role was as much a mystery as the masks all around them. She was a scion of one of Venice's oldest noble families, her loyalties tangled in webs that threatened to ensnare even the most cautious. There are forces at play here, Livia confided, lowering her voice as she produced a folded note. Powerful families, secret societies. They manipulate the masquerade not just for tradition, but to steer the city's fate. Elias unfolded the note, his eyes darting across cryptic names and locations. The mention of the Order of the Black Veil sent a chill down his spine. A clandestine group rumored to orchestrate events from the shadows. Why trust me with this? Elias asked, suspicion threading his tone. Livia's gaze hardened. Because if the killer is linked to these circles, you'll need more than just your instincts. And because my family's survival depends on the truth, even if it means breaking old alliances. Marco's brow furrowed, skepticism etched across his face. Yet, his reluctant nod indicated a willingness to cooperate, aware that the stakes demanded uneasy partnerships. As the night deepened, Elias found himself drawn into a vortex of political intrigue and personal conflict. Livia's intelligence was invaluable, but every revelation was shadowed by questions of motive and trust. The masquerade, once a festival of beauty and mystery, now felt like a trap tightening around them all. In a secluded corner, Elias pressed Livia further. How far are you willing to go for your family? Her fingers trembled slightly as they wrapped around a delicate wine glass. Further than you might expect, she whispered, eyes flickering with both resolve and vulnerability. Outside, the bells tolled midnight, their echoes weaving through the narrow canals like a reminder time was running out. Each mask hid secrets, and with every passing hour, the lines between friend and foe blurred ever more dangerously. Elias left the palazzo that night burdened with new knowledge and a creeping doubt. Livia's loyalty was a riddle wrapped in elegance, and the masquerade's deadly dance was only just beginning. The question lingered in his mind as he vanished into the misty Venetian streets, in a city where everyone wore a mask. Could he trust the face he was beginning to rely on? The clock was ticking, and with every tick the danger grew. Elias stood on the balcony overlooking the Grand Canal, the moon casting a silver path across the restless water. His breath was shallow, heart racing with the weight of the truths uncovered. The masquerade below was a kaleidoscope of swirling fabrics and glittering masks, each figure a potential threat or a hidden ally. He knew this night would mark a turning point. Alliances forged in shadows, secrets traded in whispers, and the fragile line between loyalty and betrayal stretched taut. The deadly game had escalated, and Elias was determined to play his part to the end. But as the masks fell and the final act approached, one question remained: who truly wore the 13th mask? And would Elias be ready when the final face was revealed? The answer, much like the city itself, lay shrouded in mystery and danger. The night deepened into silence, but for Elias Varga, the masquerade was far from over. His footsteps echoed softly, swallowed almost entirely by the distant lapping of the canal waters. The masquerade was in full swing, the city alive with music, laughter, and the pervasive hum of masked faces, each concealing more than just their identities. Elias moved with the deliberate caution of a man who had learned the bitter price of misplaced trust. Tonight, the festival's glamour felt like a mocking veil, a fragile mask barely concealing the rot beneath. His thoughts churned relentlessly, replaying the fragments of conversations, the subtle shifts in Livia County's demeanor, the unexplained gaps in her accounts. A gnawing suspicion had rooted itself deep in his mind, growing more insistent with each passing hour. He found her at last in a shadowed alley behind the Palazzo Conti, the grand family residence that stood as a symbol of Venetian nobility and secrecy. Livia's silhouette was framed by the dim glow of a flickering lantern, her elegant mask removed, revealing eyes sharp and unreadable. The tension between them was palpable, a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. "You're late," Livia said, her voice steady but laced with an edge Elias hadn't heard before. "I couldn't get confirmation earlier," Elias replied, his gaze unwavering. "You told me the leads were solid." She smiled, a slow, almost predatory curl of her lips. "I gave you what I could?" Sometimes truth is as fluid as the waters beneath this city. The words struck Elias like a blade. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Is that all it is to you?" "A game, because if it is, I'm playing for my life." Livia's eyes flickered, a brief flash of something vulnerable before being replaced by steely resolve. You don't understand, Elias. There are forces at play here far beyond your mission. My loyalty lies with my family first, and that means survival, no matter the cost. His heart sank. The unspoken accusation hung between them, betrayal. The knowledge that the woman he'd tentatively trusted was part of the web of deception tightened his chest. Why, Elias demanded. Why undermine me? Her answer was a whisper, barely audible over the distant strains of a violin from the festivities. Because sometimes, to protect what matters, you have to sacrifice others. Elias recoiled as if struck. The masquerade's shifting identities had just claimed its first victim of trust. Later, aboard a gondola slicing silently through the ink-dark canals, Elias sat opposite Marco Bellini. The detective's rugged features were etched with concern, his gruff exterior softened by the shared burden of their unraveling case. She's not the only one playing both sides, Marco muttered, eyes scanning the water surface. This city's full of masks within masks. Elias nodded, the weight of isolation pressing down. If I can't trust her or anyone else, what's left? The truth, Marco said simply, and your own instincts. Back in the solitude of his hotel room, Elias pored over his notes, each fragment of information a shard of a broken mirror reflecting a fractured reality. The ticking clock was a cruel reminder that time was running out 30 nights to unmask a killer who wore a new face each dusk. His mind raced, haunted by memories of past betrayals and the chilling realization that the greatest danger might not come from the shadows of Venice but from the very people he'd counted on. The masquerade was no longer just a festival. It was a battlefield where trust was a liability and survival hinged on uncovering not just the killer's identity, but the truth beneath the masks they all wore. As the night deepened, Elias's resolve hardened. He would face the betrayal head-on, but the cost was clear. The price of trust in a city of lies was isolation. And in isolation, the killer could strike with impunity. The chapter closed with Elias standing at a balcony overlooking the labyrinthine city, the wind tugging at his coat as the distant church bells tolled midnight, a stark reminder that with each passing hour, the mask of deceit grew heavier and the stakes climbed ever higher. The game had changed, and Elias was now as much a target of betrayal as the killer he pursued. The question lingered in the night air: if even your closest allies can turn against you, how do you fight a ghost that wears a new face each night? And so, beneath the swirling masks and whispered secrets of Venice, Elias braced himself for the darkness to come. Elias Varga moved with purpose through the narrow alleyways, his gray eyes sharp beneath the dark sweep of his mask. He paused at a junction where the murmur of the festival faded into the distant lapping of canal waters. The night was growing colder, and the chill seeped through the layers of his tailored coat. Ahead, a figure leaned against the brick wall, rugged, weathered, his short beard catching the faint light of a flickering lantern. Marco Bellini exhaled slowly, the tension in his stance unmistakable. Elias didn't waste words. "Detective Bellini," he said, voice low but firm. "We need to talk." Marco's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched in every line of his face. "I don't know what game you're playing, Varga," he replied gruffly. "But I'm not interested in another foreigner telling me how to do my job." The air between them was thick, charged with years of unspoken grievances and the weight of their separate burdens. Elias stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't about jurisdiction or pride. There's a killer, one who changes faces like masks. You know the streets better than anyone. I need your insight." For a moment, Marco's harsh exterior flickered with something softer: regret, perhaps, or recognition of a common enemy. "Fine," he said finally, the word heavy with reluctant acceptance. "But this partnership comes with conditions." Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was stifling, the stale scent of old paperwork mingling with the bitter tang of strong coffee. Marco spread out a series of maps and reports, his fingers tracing routes and recent incidents. "These neighborhoods," he said, voice low, "they're where the killer blends best. People come and go, faces change every night. The masquerade only makes it easier." Elias absorbed the information, noting the pragmatic edge in Marco's observations. "Your experience on the streets will fill the gaps my intel can't reach," he acknowledged. "Together we have a better chance." Despite the tentative collaboration, mistrust simmered beneath their exchanges. Marco's guarded eyes often darted to Elias, searching for signs of hidden agendas. Elias, in turn, masked his frustrations behind a calm exterior, aware that any misstep could unravel their fragile alliance. Later, as the fog curled around the lamp-lit canals, the two men met on a narrow bridge overlooking the water. Their breath formed clouds in the cold night air as they exchanged guarded words. The distant laughter of festival revelers seemed worlds away from their grim reality. "You think you can just walk into this city and fix everything?" Marco challenged quietly. "No," Elias admitted, "but I can try. And with your help, maybe we stand a chance." Marco's gaze softened for a brief moment. "I'm not the man I used to be," he confessed. "But maybe this is the redemption I need." In a small, rundown corner of Venice, Marco knelt before a modest shrine adorned with faded photographs and flickering candles. The faint tolling of church bells echoed through the alleys, underscoring the solemnity of his vow. It was a personal reckoning, a quiet promise to protect the city he loved despite the scars of his past. The uneasy partnership forged that night was a fragile thread woven through layers of mistrust and shared desperation. As the masquerade's masks concealed more than faces, Elias and Marco's alliance became the thin line between chaos and order. The city's shadows deepened, and with every step the deadly game grew more intricate. Would their combined strengths be enough to unmask the killer before the final midnight? The answer hung in the air, as elusive as the shifting faces around them. The clock ticked relentlessly onward, each moment drawing them closer to a truth that could shatter everything. The second murder had shaken the fragile threads of his investigation. He stood at the edge of a narrow alleyway near the Rialto market, the flickering glow of lanterns casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The body lay crumpled beneath a wrought iron balcony. An intricate mask shattered nearby, its fragments glinting like jagged teeth. The victim's face was obscured beneath a fresh mask, but the telltale signs were clear, the same cruel precision as the first, the same deliberate message from a killer who wore masks as easily as breathing. Elias crouched, fingers steady despite the chill that ran through his spine. The scene was silent save for the distant lapping of water against the wooden pilings. His breath formed faint clouds in the cold air as he traced the bloodstains, a cryptic trail that seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. The killer moved like a ghost, slipping through the festival's throng with an ease that defied logic. The masquerade was a living puzzle, a kaleidoscope of shifting faces and whispered secrets. Each night birthed a new mask, a new lie, and Elias was trapped in a deadly game where time was both enemy and ally. 13 nights to unmask a phantom. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft footsteps of Sofia Marini emerging from the shadows like a wraith. She was a fixture in the nightlife of Venice, her keen ears and sharper wits a valuable asset in the labyrinth of rumors and half-truths. "They say the killer is everywhere and nowhere," Sofia murmured, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Slipping past guards and slipping into crowds unseen. A shadow beneath shadows." Elias nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on him and the masks. "Masks are their armor," Sofia replied, eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and fascination. "A new face for every night, every kill? You can't trust what you see." The room around them buzzed with muffled laughter and the clinking of glasses, a stark contrast to the deadly dance unfolding beneath the veneer of celebration. Later, Elias met with Marco Bellini on a narrow bridge overlooking the Grand Canal. The detective's rugged face was etched with fatigue and frustration, a cigarette burning low between his fingers. "This killer's playing us," Marco growled, voice low and rough. "Changing faces like they're swapping coats? We're chasing ghosts?" Elias exhaled slowly, his piercing gray eyes scanning the masked revelers passing beneath them. "We have to find a pattern. Something consistent." "Patterns are for the predictable," Marco muttered, flicking ash into the dark water below. "This one's a chameleon." The ticking clock pressed on, each passing hour a reminder that time was not on their side. Elias felt the walls closing in, the isolation deepening as trust became a fragile commodity. Livia Conti's intelligence was invaluable, but even she remained an enigma, her loyalty as shifting as the masks around them. At a lavish ball beneath crystal chandeliers, the music swelled in a crescendo of strings and whispers. Elias moved through the crowd, every masked face a potential enemy or ally, every glance a question mark. The swirl of silk and perfume, the shimmer of gold and the shadow of secrets. Venice was a city transformed, a stage set for deception. He caught sight of Livia, her dark hair cascading over an elaborate gold mask, eyes sharp and unreadable. Their brief exchange of glances was charged with unspoken tension. Trust was a luxury neither could afford. As midnight approached, Elias's mind raced. The killer's second mask was still out there, blending effortlessly into the throng, a specter slipping through the cracks of his vigilance. The pressure mounted, the stakes rising with every heartbeat. In the quiet moments between chaos, Elias wrestled with the crushing weight of uncertainty. How could he unmask a killer who was no one and everyone at once, whose true face was a secret wrapped in shadows? The masquerade was a deadly dance, and with each passing night the music grew louder, the steps more perilous. Elias knew the coming nights would test not only his skill but his very grip on reality. The second face was revealed, but the true face remained a mystery. The hunt was far from over, and the clock was ticking relentlessly toward the 13th mask. And somewhere in the swirling crowd, the killer smiled behind a new mask, unseen and untouchable, waiting for the next move. The game was on, and Elias was running out of time. The walls, draped in dark velvets and hung with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their every move, echoed faint murmurs of clandestine conversations. Their footsteps were muffled by the thick carpets, the only other sounds the occasional crackle of a candle flame and the distant lapping of canal waters against ancient stone. Livia's fingers traced the intricate patterns on an ornate tapestry as she led Elias deeper into the heart of the building, her expression guarded but resolute. "This is where the real power lies," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft rustle of silk and the distant clink of glass. "Not in the open festivities, but behind closed doors like this." Elias nodded, his piercing gray eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. The masquerade had always been a game of appearances, but here, beneath the surface, the stakes were far higher. "Who are they?" "A secret society," Livia replied, her gaze flickering to a nearby alcove where silhouettes shifted behind translucent curtains. "They've controlled the masks, the festival, and much of Venetian politics for generations. And now, they're entwined with the killer's game." Her words settled heavily between them as they reached a secluded chamber where a single velvet-draped table awaited. Atop it lay a folded letter, its parchment yellowed with age, embossed with a wax seal bearing an unfamiliar emblem. Livia broke the seal with a practiced hand and unfolded the letter carefully, revealing a dense script written in an archaic hand. "This," she said, sliding the document across to Elias, "details the society's manipulation of the masquerade, how they've used it to conceal illicit dealings and silence dissenters. The killer's masks. Just another tool in their arsenal." Elias's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the implications. The killer was no lone wolf. They were a ghost within a greater, more dangerous network. Doubt crept in, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. If the masquerade's very foundation was rigged by this shadowy cabal, then whom could he trust? Outside, the palazzo's grand windows framed the labyrinthine canals, their mirror-like surfaces reflecting the flickering lanterns and the countless masked figures drifting like phantoms through the night. The city itself seemed complicit in the masquerade's deception, its ancient stones harboring secrets as old as Venice itself. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from a nearby piazza, followed by the rapid footsteps of hurried guests disappearing into the maze of alleys. Elias's heart quickened, a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of celebration, danger was never far away. He glanced at Livia, whose eyes met his with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. The lines between ally and adversary blurred further with every revelation. Elias realized that the killer's game was not just about murder. It was a challenge to his very understanding of identity and trust. As they retreated into the shadows, the city's pulse quickened. The masquerade was no longer just a festival. It was a battlefield where every mask concealed a secret, and every secret carried the weight of life or death. Elias steeled himself for the nights ahead, knowing that unmasking the killer would demand more than intellect. It would require him to confront the shadows within himself. The ticking clock of the 30 nights pressed onward, each hour slipping away with a whisper of silk and the faintest echo of footsteps in the dark. The game had changed, and Elias was caught in its deadly dance, a dance where the music played for no one's benefit but the 13th mask's. Yet, amid the swirling mists and shifting faces, one question lingered, sharp and unyielding: how long before the masks fell, and with them the last vestiges of trust? The night deepened, and with it the secrets in the shadows multiplied. He leaned closer, scanning the images Alessandra Fiore had just sent over. Her voice, calm and measured, crackled softly through the encrypted video link. "Look here," she said, pointing to a series of photographs. "Notice the recurring symbols on the masks. They're not random." Elias's eyes narrowed. The masquerade, with all its dazzling disguises and swirling anonymity, held a secret language, one he was only beginning to decode. Each mask bore subtle insignias, cryptic motifs that seemed to correspond to the city's elite families, their histories etched in delicate filigree or hidden in the patterns of lace and jewels. He tapped his fingers on the cluttered desk, the sound sharp in the silence. "So the killer isn't just hiding behind faces," he muttered. "They're weaving a narrative through the masks themselves." Alessandra nodded. "Exactly. And these aren't just any faces, they're a map, a twisted homage, or perhaps a challenge." The weight of that realization settled heavily on Elias. The killer was not simply a ghost lurking in the crowd, but a puppeteer, pulling strings in the shadows, using the masquerade as a stage for a deadly performance. Every victim, every mask, was a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that connected back to Venice's tangled web of power, betrayal, and long-buried grudges. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock. Marco Bellini stepped inside, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "I've been digging into the background of those symbols. They lead to some influential names, families, with a lot to lose if this gets out." Elias gestured toward the screen, where Alessandra's analysis flickered. "We're looking at a conspiracy that runs deep. The killer's playing a dangerous game, and the stakes just got higher." Marco paced the room, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "We're running out of time. The more we dig, the more enemies we make." The tension in the air was palpable, a silent storm brewing beneath the veneer of their alliance. Despite their shared goal, distrust lingered between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the precariousness of their situation. Later that evening, Elias found himself alone in a shadowed corner of the grand ballroom, where the masquerade's glittering chaos unfolded. Livia Conti approached silently, her mask shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. She handed him a folded note, her eyes flickering with a mixture of urgency and caution. "This might help," she whispered, before melting back into the swirling crowd. Elias unfolded the note carefully. It contained a list of names, dates, and cryptic references that aligned unnervingly with Alessandra's findings. The killer's trail was threading through the city's most untouchable circles, cloaked beneath layers of tradition and secrecy. As the night deepened, the weight of the investigation pressed down on Elias, back at his quarters. He stared out over the labyrinthine canals, the water reflecting the fractured light of the moon. The ticking clock was relentless, each second a reminder of the narrowing window to unmask the killer. His mind raced, haunted by memories of past failures and the growing fear that he might be chasing shadows, or worse, that the shadows were chasing him. The masks the killer wore were not just physical disguises, but metaphors for the shifting allegiances and fragmented truths that surrounded him. In the quiet solitude, Elias's resolve wavered. The fragments of truth he had uncovered were shards of a mirror reflecting not only the killer's deception, but the fragile state of his own identity. Trust was a scarce commodity, and every revelation carried the risk of deeper betrayal. Yet, despite the mounting paranoia and psychological strain, Elias knew he could not falter. The masquerade was far more than a festival, It was a battleground where every mask worn was a weapon, and the final face to be revealed could mean salvation or destruction. The night stretched before him, filled with uncertain shadows and hidden dangers. As the clock edged closer to midnight, Elias steeled himself for the trials yet to come, the fragments of truth guiding him through the labyrinth of lies and masks that define the deadly game. Elias Varga moved cautiously through the labyrinthine alleyways, his breath shallow and eyes scanning every shadow. The city's festive veneer was deceptive. Beneath it, a predator lurked, one that had just come terrifyingly close. He ducked behind a crumbling wall, heart hammering against his ribs. The narrow alley was slick with damp, the smell of brine and rot thick in the air. Somewhere downstream, a gondolier's song drifted, haunting and sorrowful. Elias's hand brushed the cold stone, grounding himself as adrenaline surged. Then, without warning, a figure lunged from the darkness. The glint of a blade flashed, slicing the air where Elias had stood moments before. Instinct took over. He twisted, narrowly evading the strike. Pain blossomed along his side as he stumbled, the sharp sting reminding him how close he had come to death. Breathing hard, Elias pivoted, searching for his attacker. But the alley was empty again, save for the lingering echo of footsteps fading toward the canal. The killer had vanished once more, leaving behind a chilling promise. Elias pressed his hand against the wound, grimacing. This was no longer a game of observation and deduction, it was a fight for survival. The killer was not only outpacing him but toying with him, drawing him deeper into a deadly dance. He made his way to the rendezvous point, an unassuming apartment overlooking a quiet canal. Marco Bellini was already there, pacing with a restless energy that seemed to fill the room. The detective's gruff features were etched with concern as he glanced up. "Thought you'd be more careful," Marco said, voice rough. "You're lucky to be alive." Elias managed a grim smile, wincing as he eased onto a worn leather chair. Luck's running thin. The room was dim, lit only by a flickering candle that cast long, wavering shadows on the peeling plaster. The distant strains of the masquerade's music floated through the open window, a stark contrast to the tension that hung between the two men. "We need to rethink this," Elias said, fingers brushing the blood drying at his side. "The killer knows us better than we know him." "He's anticipating our moves?" Marco nodded, his eyes narrowing. "And if he's this close, no one's safe, not even us." Their uneasy partnership had always been fraught with tension, but the near-death experience cracked open old wounds and silent suspicions. Doubts whispered in the silence, who could be trusted? Was betrayal lurking just beneath the surface? A sudden knock at the door broke the heavy stillness. Elias's hand instinctively went to the concealed pistol at his waist. Livia Conti stepped inside, her elegant mask catching the candlelight, eyes sharp and alert. "I have news," she said, voice low but urgent. "The society we suspected, they're moving faster than we thought. There's a meeting tonight, and I have a way in." Elias studied her carefully. Livia's loyalty had always been a question mark, her motives tangled between family allegiance and their shared goal. But now, with the killer's shadow looming larger, he had no choice but to accept her help. As they laid out the plan, Sofia Marini's earlier whispers echoed in Elias's mind. The masquerade was no longer just a backdrop, it was a weapon, a mask behind which death stalked. Later, alone in his room, Elias stood before a cracked Venetian mirror. The fractured reflection stared back at him, masked yet broken. The lines between hunter and hunted blurred, and the weight of past failures pressed heavily on his shoulders. He clenched his fists, resolve hardening. This was no longer a simple chase. It was a test of identity, trust, and survival. He would have to adapt, to outthink a killer who wore not just masks, but lies, betrayal, and shadows. Outside, the city's heartbeat pulsed on, indifferent to the peril lurking in its alleys. The clock was ticking, and for Elias Varga, every second was a gamble. The night was far from over, and so was the hunt. The moon cast fractured silver patterns on the water's surface, mirroring the fractured truths that gnawed at his mind. Around him, the crowd moved like a living tide, faces hidden behind ornate masks, their identities as fluid as the waters beneath. He paused, gripping the cold iron railing, eyes scanning the swirling masses. trying to pierce the veil of anonymity that cloaked Venice's masquerade. He had come to understand that the killer was no mere murderer. This was a puppeteer weaving a deadly game of shadows, manipulating not only appearances, but the very loyalties of those around him. Each mask was more than a disguise. It was a weapon, a tool to fracture trust, to sow chaos among allies. The realization struck Elias like a cold wave. The killer's power transcended flesh and bone. It was the power to redefine reality itself. Earlier that evening, he had met with Livia Conti in a secluded salon nestled within a palazzo whose faded grandeur whispered secrets of centuries past. The room was bathed in golden candlelight, shadows dancing against frescoed walls as a soft violin melody drifted from a distant chamber. Livia's eyes held a glint of both warmth and calculation as she spoke in hushed tones, her words laced with the delicate poison of ambiguity. "The game is deeper than you think, Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Masks aren't just worn on faces here, they're worn on hearts, on intentions. Trust is the rarest mask of all." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. Their alliance was tenuous, forged in necessity rather than conviction. Yet, in this labyrinth of deceit, Livia's knowledge was a beacon if he could trust it. Later, in a narrow alley flanked by crumbling brick and flickering lanterns, Marco Bellini confronted a shadowed figure whose intentions were as obscured as the night. The detective's voice was low, edged with the roughness of years spent navigating Venice's underbelly. "You think this city's secrets are yours to keep? Think again." The echo of footsteps filled the silence that followed, a tense standoff that spoke volumes of fractured loyalties and unspoken threats. Marco's pragmatism clashed with Elias's analytical mind, yet both knew the necessity of their uneasy partnership. At a bustling cafe alive with the murmur of masquerade guests and the clatter of glasses, Sofia Marini moved with practiced subtlety. Her sharp eyes met Elias's across the crowded room before she slid a folded note beneath his cup. The gesture was brief, almost imperceptible, but the urgency in her gaze was unmistakable. Elias unfolded the note, the ink smeared slightly as if the message had been written in haste. It contained names, places, whisperings of a secret society pulling strings behind the festival's glittering facade. The weight of this knowledge settled heavily on him. The killer's manipulations extended far beyond the physical realm. This was a psychological labyrinth designed to ensnare. As the night deepened, Elias felt the walls closing in. Every interaction was now shadowed by doubt. Every alliance questioned through the prism of suspicion. The masks weren't just on faces, they were on intentions, on alliances, on the very essence of truth. In this city of masks within masks, Elias faced a daunting question. How to unmask a killer who thrived on deception when even his own reflection seemed alien? The clock ticked relentlessly toward midnight, the deadline inching closer with every breath. The masquerade's music swelled, a haunting symphony that seemed to mock the fragile bonds of trust. Elias's resolve hardened, but beneath the professional exterior, a storm of paranoia and fear churned, threatening to consume him. Tonight, the game had shifted. The killer was no longer merely hiding behind a mask, he was rewriting the rules. And Elias had to find a way to see through the illusions before the final mask fell and the deadly dance reached its climax. He took a deep breath, stepping back onto the bridge. The crowd surged around him, faces flickering like specters beneath their masks. Somewhere among them, the killer smiled behind an ever-changing mask, weaving lies and betrayal. Elias's eyes narrowed. He would not be another pawn in this deadly masquerade. Not tonight. But as the first chime of midnight echoed through the Venetian night, a cold certainty settled over him. In a city where masks hid not only faces but souls, the greatest danger was losing himself. The flickering gas lamps cast long, wavering shadows across the slick cobblestones, their light struggling to penetrate the thick fog that clung to the city like a shroud. Every footstep echoed ominously, swallowed quickly by the labyrinthine maze of streets and canals. Elias's breath came in shallow bursts beneath the mask that obscured his face, his piercing gray eyes scanning every crevice for clues. The call had come just past midnight. Another body discovered, the third in as many nights. The killer, that elusive ghost cloaked in shifting identities, had struck again. But this time, the murder carried a weight far heavier than the gruesome act itself. The scene whispered a message meant solely for Elias. He arrived just as the local police cordoned off the narrow alley where the victim lay sprawled, face obscured by a mask cracked and smeared with blood. The faint tolling of the church bells from a distant campanile marked the hour, a cruel reminder of time slipping relentlessly away. Marco Bellini, the gruff detective who had become an uneasy ally, was already on site, his rugged features hard as stone beneath the brim of his soaked hat. "It's bad, Elias," Marco muttered, voice low and gravelly. "This one's personal." Elias knelt beside the body, noting the faint traces of a symbol carved into the victim's palm, a cryptic sigil he recognized from his own fractured past. It was a calling card, a taunt, a declaration of vendetta. His heart tightened. The killer was no mere random murderer, but someone who knew him intimately, someone who sought to unravel his carefully constructed defenses. The weight of the revelation pressed down on Elias like the fog that swirled around them. Each murder was no longer just a puzzle to solve, but a calculated strike aimed straight at his own fractured identity. It was a game of shadows, and he feared he was losing. Later, in the dim glow of a Venetian cafe tucked away from the festival's grand halls, Elias met with Livia Conti. She sat poised and elegant, her dark hair cascading over a shimmering gold mask that caught the candlelight with every subtle movement. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken questions and half-truths. "This killer," Elias began cautiously, "he's sending me a message. The symbol on the victim's hand, it's not random." Livia's eyes flickered with a mixture of concern and something unreadable. "Venice holds many secrets, Elias. Some are buried deep within the families who have guarded their legacies for centuries. Perhaps your past has more threads tangled with this city than you realize." Her words struck a nerve. Elias knew her loyalty was complicated, fiercely protective of her family's standing, yet undeniably valuable to his cause. Trust was a fragile commodity here, as brittle as the glass masks adorning the grand ball attendees. Meanwhile, Marco sifted through the evidence with methodical precision. The veteran detective's pragmatic approach grounded Elias, providing a steady counterbalance to the swirling chaos of shifting identities and betrayals. "We're chasing ghosts," Marco admitted, "but ghosts leave footprints. We just have to find where they lead." As midnight approached once more, Elias returned to his rented room overlooking a quiet canal. The space was littered with photographs, notes, and fragmented clues, each piece a shard of a larger puzzle that refused to come together. He traced his fingers over the symbol again, a bitter taste of recognition filling his mouth. Memories he had long tried to suppress surfaced unbidden. The botched operation, the colleague lost in the shadows, the guilt that gnawed at his soul. The killer wasn't just a menace in the present. They were the embodiment of Elias's past mistakes and regrets. His reflection in the cracked mirror caught his eye, the masked man staring back at him, an agent trapped between identities, haunted by the past and racing against time. The third murder was a turning point, a cruel escalation that forced Elias to confront not only the external threat, but the demons lurking within himself. The city around him remained alive with the masquerade's deceptive gaiety, but for Elias, the masks were slipping. The clock ticked relentlessly toward a conclusion neither he nor the killer could evade. The question was no longer who the killer was, but whether Elias could unmask the truth before it claimed him next. And as the first light of dawn threatened to break the spell of night, Elias knew the game had changed. The killer's vendetta was personal, the stakes higher than ever, and the shadow of the 13th mask loomed closer with every passing second. The lanterns cast long, wavering shadows that danced along the ancient stone walls, mirroring the unease twisting in his gut. Beside him, Marco Bellini moved with a grudging purpose, his eyes scanning the darkened corners like a hawk hunting prey. Their uneasy partnership had borne fruit, fragments of a tangled web that stretched far beyond the city's glittering masquerade balls. But trust, Elias knew, was still a scarce commodity between them. So, The noble Conti family has more than just old money, Marco muttered, his voice rough like gravel as they paused beneath a flickering lamp. They've got secrets and some dangerous ones. Elias nodded, glancing around at the quiet street, the faint echoes of revelry a distant murmur behind them. Livia's been helpful, but I can't shake the feeling she's playing a deeper game. She's got her own loyalties and they don't always align with ours. Marco spat on the cobblestones, impatience lacing his tone. In this city, everyone wears a mask, figurative or not. The question is who's hiding what and why. The irony of their situation was not lost on Elias. Here they were, two men once at odds, forced into an alliance by the relentless shadow of a killer who shifted faces as easily as the tide. Each step they took peeled back layers of deception, revealing connections between suspects that blurred lines between friend and foe. Elias's mind raced to keep pace with the shifting puzzle pieces, the weight of the 30-night deadline pressing heavier with each passing hour. Later that evening, the pair found themselves in a dimly lit tavern nestled along a canal, its windows fogged from the cold night air. The room buzzed with muted conversations, laughter laced with suspicion, and the clinking of glasses. Among the patrons, masked figures mingled, their identities obscured beneath elaborate disguises that seemed to mock the very notion of truth. Livia Conti arrived with the grace of a shadow, her dark hair framing a face half hidden behind a silver filigree mask. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, met Elias's with a flicker of guarded warmth. "I hear you've been asking questions," she said softly, taking a seat beside him. Elias returned her gaze steadily. "And the answers are tangled in webs I don't yet understand." She smiled faintly, the curve of her lips betraying a hint of amusement. "Venice is a city built on secrets, Elias. Sometimes to find the truth you have to look where the light doesn't reach." Their conversation flowed like the canal waters outside, deep, winding and concealing more than it revealed. Elias sensed the underlying tension, the unspoken bargains, and the delicate balance of trust they were attempting to forge. But beneath it all, the ever-present motif of betrayal loomed, a specter shadowing every word exchanged. As the night deepened, Elias slipped away to speak with Sofia Marini, the bartender whose ears seemed attuned to every whisper in the masquerade's underbelly. Her voice was a low murmur amid the tavern's subdued chaos. "Rumors swirl like the fog," Sofia confided, sliding a glass across the bar. "There are those who would use the festival's anonymity to settle scores-old grudges, personal vendettas. You'd be surprised how many masks hide more than just faces." Elias leaned in, the weight of her words sinking deep. Each revelation tightened the noose around the elusive killer, but also further entangled the threads of suspicion and deceit. Later, beneath the indifferent gaze of a waning moon, Marco confronted a suspect in a narrow alleyway. The chill night air wrapped around them like a shroud as terse words were exchanged, the quiet menace in Marco's voice cutting through the silence. Elias watched from the shadows, heart pounding with the fragile hope that this fragile alliance might finally yield the breakthrough they desperately needed. But the question lingered, unspoken yet palpable. In a city where everyone hides behind shifting masks, who could truly be trusted? The masquerade was far from over, and with each passing moment, the stakes climbed higher. And somewhere in the labyrinth of Venice's winding streets and shadowed corners, the 13th mask waited, ready to strike again. As Elias and Marco retreated into the night, their fragile partnership held by threads of necessity and suspicion, the ticking clock reminded them the game was only just beginning. Elias Varga felt it keenly as he navigated the labyrinthine streets, the festive cacophony now tinged with an unmistakable undercurrent of menace. The laughter and music that once seemed the backdrop to his mission had warped into something darker, a dissonant symphony that echoed the shifting alliances and veiled threats at play. Livia Conti's presence was a constant puzzle. Tonight she was resplendent in a mask of gilded filigree, her dark hair cascading over a velvet gown embroidered with the crest of her venerable family. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a siren's allure that seemed both inviting and warning. Elias had watched her from a distance, noting the subtle glances exchanged with shadowed figures at the edges of the piazza. Her loyalties were as layered as the masks they all wore, and each revelation about her only deepened the enigma. When he finally caught up with her behind a screen of cypress trees near the Palazzo Ducale, the noise of the crowd dulled to a muted hum. Livia's eyes, sharp and unyielding beneath her mask, met his with a flicker of hesitation. "Elias," she began, her voice low and measured, "you must understand, my allegiance is not so simple." He folded his arms, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging between them. "I thought we were allies." She laughed softly, a sound both bitter and resigned. "Allies, perhaps, but family comes first, always. The Conti name carries burdens you cannot fathom. I walk a tightrope, trying to protect both my blood and the fragile truth you seek." The tension coiled tighter in Elias's chest. Trust was a currency in short supply, and Livia's confession was both a crack in the facade and a warning. As she spoke, the distant tolling of church bells marked the hour, a grim reminder that time was slipping away. Meanwhile, Marco Bellini patrolled the canals with the grim determination of a man haunted by his past. The rain threatened to spill from the low-hanging clouds, the cobblestones slick beneath his boots. His rugged face was set in lines of weary resolve as he considered the uneasy alliance with Elias, a partnership born not of friendship, but necessity. The detective's world was one of shadows and unspoken debts, and tonight the masquerade's darkness seemed to seep into every corner of the city. At a nearby tavern, Sofia Marini moved with practiced subtlety, her keen eyes scanning the room as she tended the bar. The scent of spiced wine mingled with whispered secrets, her role as an information broker more vital than ever. Slipping a folded note into Elias's palm as he approached, she murmured, "Not everything is as it seems. Watch the council's envoy. There are whispers of a betrayal that could change everything." Elias unfolded the note, the coded message hinting at fractures within the political elite that governed the masquerade's pulse. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him, sharpening his focus even as it deepened the labyrinth of deceit. Back beneath the flickering lanterns of the piazza, Elias confronted Livia once more. "If your family's interests come at the cost of innocent lives, where do you stand?" he demanded, eyes searching hers for the truth. Her gaze faltered, the mask slipping briefly to reveal the turmoil beneath. "Between a rock and a hard place," she admitted. "But know this, I want the killer stopped as much as you do. The masquerade is more than a game, it is a battlefield where every move could be your last." As midnight approached, the city held its breath. The carnival's bright colors faded into shadows, the revelers' laughter replaced by whispers of suspicion. Elias felt the noose tighten, the lines between friend and foe blurring into a dangerous gray. In the heart of Venice, amid the shifting faces and secret agendas, Elias Varga stood poised on the edge of revelation and ruin. The carnival deepened, and with it the peril that awaited beneath the masks. He couldn't afford to falter. Not now. As the clock struck midnight, the flicker of a candle caught the edge of a mask glinting in the darkness like a silent warning. The game was far from over, and in Venice, the masks were never truly removed. Elias Varga sat motionless, the muted crackle of the flame a fragile barrier against the darkness seeping into his mind. Outside, the rain traced erratic patterns on the stained glass, each droplet a whispered echo of memories he fought desperately to suppress. He closed his eyes, the silence around him folding into the sharp edges of the past. The botched operation played relentlessly behind his eyelids, the shouted commands, the sudden ambush, the blinding flash of gunfire. And then the final, irrevocable image of his colleague, eyes wide with betrayal and pain, collapsing into the unforgiving alley. Elias's throat tightened, a ragged breath betraying the stoic mask he wore in the field. Venice, with all its beauty and deceit, now felt like a labyrinth, not just of winding canals, but of fractured identities and unresolved ghosts. The masquerade outside the Palazzo was in full swing, the joyous revelry a stark contrast to the turmoil within him. Every mask he saw was a reminder, beneath each facade, a truth waiting to shatter. The door creaked open softly, and Livia Conti slipped inside, her footsteps light but purposeful. Her dark eyes, framed by an ornate black and gold mask, held a flicker of concern as she approached him. "Elias," she said quietly, "you've been distant tonight. The shadows are longer here than in the streets." He met her gaze, the weight of unspoken pain pressing down. "The past doesn't stay buried in Venice," he replied, voice low but steady, "especially not mine." Livia moved closer, the scent of jasmine and aged wine trailing behind her. "You carry more than this case, don't you?" He exhaled slowly, memories flooding anew. It was a mission gone wrong. I lost someone important. It's why I'm here, why I can't afford to fail again. Her eyes softened, but the mask remained. "Then you must let the past guide you, not bind you." "We all wear masks, Elias, some to protect, some to deceive." Their conversation was interrupted by the low murmur of guests below, laughter and music weaving through the night air. Yet within the palazzo, the tension was palpable, a fragile thread connecting two souls, navigating a maze of secrets. Later, Elias stepped out onto a narrow stone bridge, the fog swirling thickly around the lanterns hanging from wrought iron posts. The canal beneath mirrored the fractured moonlight, casting ghostly reflections that danced with the night's chill. Marco Bellini awaited him, arms crossed, his rugged face etched with concern and frustration. "You're slipping, Elias," he said gruffly. "The past is bleeding into your work, and it's clouding your judgment." Elias met his gaze, the weight of his own doubts mirrored in the detective's eyes. "I'm aware, but this case, it's not just about catching a killer. It's about confronting the part of me I left behind." Marco shook his head, the fog swallowing his breath. "Just don't let it get the better of you. We need you sharp." The uneasy truce between them was a fragile lifeline in a city where trust was as fleeting as the masks worn by its inhabitants. Back in his temporary quarters, Elias fired up a secure channel connecting with Alessandra Fiori. Her calm, steady presence on the other end was a balm to his fraying nerves. "Alessandra," he began, voice taut, "I'm running through the timelines again. There's a pattern emerging, but I can't shake this feeling that the killer's playing on my history." She nodded, fingers flying over her keyboard as data scrolled across her screen. "You're not imagining it. The links you uncovered are no coincidence. We need to dig deeper into your past operations. Sometimes the enemy wears familiarity like a second skin." Elias leaned back, the room spinning for a moment. "It's a dangerous game, one I'm not sure I'm ready to play." "You don't have a choice." "Not if you want to stop this," Alessandro replied firmly. "Remember, the masks people wear are fragile. They crack under pressure. We just have to find the right moment to expose the truth." Her words lingered as the call ended, leaving Elias alone with the weight of his memories and the relentless ticking of the masquerade's clock. The night deepened, and with it, the shadows lengthened, both in the city and within Elias himself. Each step forward in the investigation felt like walking a tightrope stretched over an abyss, the echoes of his past threatening to pull him under. Yet beneath the fear and doubt, a spark of determination burned. He would unmask the killer, no matter the cost. As the first light of dawn threatened the horizon, Elias stood at his window, watching the quiet canals shimmer with the promise of a new day. But in Venice, as in his own fractured soul, the masks were never fully removed, and the dance of deception was far from over. With a steadying breath, Elias prepared to face whatever the next night and the next mask would bring. The past was no longer just a shadow behind him. It was the battleground on which his future would be decided. And somewhere in the labyrinth of Venice's winding streets and shifting faces, the 13th mask awaited. Lanterns cast fractured reflections on the rippling canal waters, painting the world in flickering gold and shadow. His gray eyes scanned the crowd, each face a potential mask hiding a deadly secret. The city seemed to breathe with a life of its own, a labyrinth of shifting identities and whispered betrayals. Tonight marked the emergence of the killer's fourth mask, and with it, a new challenge that gnawed at Elias's resolve. He shifted slightly, the leather of his coat rustling softly as he adjusted the ornate mask concealing his features. The festival's cacophony, laughter, music, distant footsteps poured into his ears, yet his focus was razor-sharp. Time was bleeding away. The clock's relentless ticking echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder of the 13 nights allotted to unmask a ghost. Earlier that evening, his meeting with Livia Conti had ended with more questions than answers. The palazzo where they convened was a glittering cage of opulence. Crystal chandeliers swayed gently, casting kaleidoscopes of light over guests draped in sumptuous silks and Baroque masks. Livia's dark hair framed her face like a curtain, her eyes bright but guarded as she leaned close to whisper. "The masquerade hides more than faces," she murmured, her voice a silk thread woven with urgency. "There are currents beneath the surface alliances forged in shadow. The killer exploits this. You must be careful, Elias. Not everyone you trust will stand by your side." Her words echoed his own fears. The killer's ability to slip through their grasp, adopting new faces with terrifying ease, was beginning to unravel his confidence. Each mask was a layer of deception, a carefully crafted lie that blurred the lines between friend and foe. The night deepened, and Elias found himself navigating Venice's narrow alleys alongside Marco Bellini. The detective's gruff pragmatism was a grounding force amid the swirling chaos. They had tracked a figure matching the description of the fourth mask to a shadowed corner near the Rialto, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and rotting canal water. Marco's footsteps were deliberate, his voice low as he called out into the darkness. "You can't hide forever," Marco growled, but their quarry melted into the labyrinthine streets before they could close the distance. The chase ended with nothing but silence and the echo of fleeting footsteps. Frustration bloomed within Elias, a bitter seed that threatened to choke his composure. How could he catch a killer who seemed to anticipate every move? The masquerade was a perfect shield, a swirling dance of anonymity that played to the murderer's strengths. Later, seeking solace, Elias slipped into a dimly lit tavern where Sophia Marini tended bar. The place was a refuge for those who sought secrets rather than revelry. Sophia's sharp eyes flickered with recognition as he approached. "You look like a man who's carrying the weight of Venice on his shoulders," she said, pouring a glass of deep red wine. "Rumors don't come easy, but I hear whispers something about a new face, someone who's not just hiding but playing a game." Elias leaned in, the noise of the tavern dimming as he absorbed her words. Every fragment of information was a thread to pull, a clue to unravel the tangled web. Yet, with each revelation, the line between ally and adversary blurred further. Paranoia settled like a shadow across his thoughts, whispering doubts about every gesture, every glance. The killer was not just a man with many masks, but a master of manipulation, turning Venice's beauty into a deadly stage. As the clock edged closer to midnight, Elias felt the weight of the ticking time bearing down on him. The fourth mask was but another step in a relentless dance, and the question lingered: how long before the killer's next move? The city's lights shimmered, but beneath their glow lurked a darkness that threatened to consume them all. Elias's breath caught as he spotted a figure in the crowd, a mask unlike any before, the artistry meticulous and chilling. His heart hammered in his chest. Was this the killer's new face? The chase was far from over, and the night's shadows whispered warnings. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. He stepped forward, blending into the throng, the mask a fragile shield against the secrets that swirled around him. The game was escalating, and with each passing moment, the stakes grew higher. The killer was always watching, always waiting one step ahead, one mask away from slipping into the darkness once more. As Elias plunged deeper into the masquerade's deadly dance, he knew one truth with painful clarity: the clock was ticking and time was running out. The night held its breath, the fourth mask looming on the horizon like a specter of dread. Elias's journey had only just begun, and the shadows whispered promises of revelation and ruin. Elias Vargas stepped inside, the muted warmth and faint scent of aged wood and spiced wine washing over him. The low murmur of conversation pulsed beneath the clatter of glasses and the occasional burst of laughter, all blending into a background hum that felt both inviting and threatening. Sophia Marini stood behind the bar, her figure outlined by the soft glow of candlelight. Her dark eyes scanned the room with practiced ease, capturing every glance, every whispered word. She was the pulse of this clandestine world, a keeper of secrets veiled beneath the masquerade's glittering facade. Elias approached quietly, sliding onto a worn stool. Sophia's gaze flicked to him, sharp and calculating. "You look like a man chasing ghosts," she said softly, pouring a glass of deep red wine. "Sometimes ghosts leave footprints," Elias replied, his voice low, cautious. The bartender nodded, her expression tightening. "But footprints can lead you into traps." What do you want to hear? Rumors, truth, or something in between? Elias leaned in, lowering his voice. Anything that points to the killer. Someone who wears more than one face, who moves unseen? Sophia's eyes narrowed, and she glanced around to ensure no unwanted ears were near. There's talk, she began, of a symbol and obscure emblem seen fleetingly on a mask, a token passed between certain guests. None dare speak openly. But I heard the name Vincenzo whispered, tied to those who walk the shadows of this festival. Elias's mind raced. Vincenzo, a name buried in old intelligence files. A ghost himself, linked to underground dealings and secrets long buried beneath Venice's shimmering surface. Where did you hear this? Elias asked. From those who fear it. The ones who move in the margins, servants, minor nobles, and mercenaries alike. They see but do not dare speak. The weight of the information pressed on Elias. Could he trust Sophia, a woman whose allegiance was as fluid as the tides lapping at the city's foundations? Her role as a broker of secrets meant she navigated a perilous line between truth and deception. He took a slow sip of wine, eyes locked on hers. Why help me? A faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched Sophia's lips. Because chaos is bad for business, and because some masks hide more than faces, they hide enemies. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by the creaking of the tavern door. Elias's head snapped toward the entrance as a group of masked figures slipped inside, their presence a reminder that danger was never far, even here. He watched as the figures melted into the crowd, their laughter hollow and rehearsed. The masquerade was a living puzzle, and with every piece shifted, the picture grew more complex. Later, standing alone outside beneath the cold bite of the Venetian night, Elias stared up at the flickering street lamps. Sophia's words echoed in his mind, entwining with the shadows that danced along the ancient stone walls. Vincenzo, a name. A thread that could unravel the killer's web or lead Elias deeper into the labyrinth of lies. The ticking clock was relentless. The masquerade's masks would change again, and with each transformation, the killer would slip further into the crowd. Elias clenched his fists, the cold seeping into his bones. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, yet he needed Sophia's secret to survive the nights ahead. The city whispered its secrets to those who dared to listen, but the truth was a dangerous mask to wear. As he turned back toward the shadows, the question burned in his mind. Could he risk everything on a whisper? And what if the whisper was a lie? The night deepened, and the masquerade's dance continued, each mask hiding a truth, each truth a threat. Elias Varga was caught in the heart of a deadly game where every secret could be his last. The hunt resumed, and the shadows waited. Elias Varga moved carefully through the twisting labyrinth of alleys, the faint echo of his footsteps swallowed by the surrounding stillness. The masquerade festival, with its tumultuous crowds and swirling masks, felt a distant memory, here replaced by a spectral silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the eaves above. Ahead, a narrow passage opened between two aging buildings, where a single flickering lantern swayed gently in the breeze, casting a pale, unsteady glow on a heavy wooden door, its surface worn and scarred by time. Elias's pulse quickened as he approached. This was the threshold to a hidden world, the secret society that lurked behind the veneer of Venetian pageantry. He adjusted the mask concealing his identity, its dark contours a deliberate contrast to the elaborate disguises worn by the revelers hours before. His mission had brought him here, to penetrate the shadows and uncover the sinister forces orchestrating the deadly game of masks from within. The door creaked softly as Elias pushed it open, slipping inside with practiced stealth. The room beyond was vast and dimly lit, adorned with rich tapestries and ornate chandeliers that hung like frozen stars in the gloom. Around a long table draped in crimson velvet, a dozen figures sat, their faces hidden behind intricate masks of gold, feathers, and jewels. Their voices were low, measured, a murmur of conspiratorial tones that filled the chamber with a palpable tension. Elias found a shadowed corner near the entrance and allowed his eyes to roam, cataloging each masked attendee. The atmosphere was thick with power, ambition, and veiled threats. He recognized the subtle cues of dominance in their posture, the cautious exchanges of glances that betrayed fragile alliances. This was no mere gathering, it was the heart of a clandestine network pulling the strings behind the festival's facade. A sudden movement caught his attention. Livia Conti emerged from the shadows, her presence as commanding as ever despite the delicate mask framing her striking features. Her dark hair shimmered under the chandelier's light, and her eyes glinted with a mixture of resolve and uncertainty as she approached Elias. "You made it," she whispered, her voice a silken thread amidst the murmurs, "but be careful. Not everyone here shares your interests." Elias nodded, appreciating both the warning and the fragile alliance they shared. Livia's loyalty was a precarious thing rooted in family legacy and personal ambition. It was as shifting as the masks they both wore. The meeting unfolded with chilling clarity. At its head sat a figure whose mask was a grotesque blend of Venetian artistry and menace, the embodiment of the society's ruthless grip on power. He spoke of influence, control, and the manipulation of the masquerade's chaos to serve political ends. Each word was a calculated move in a game far larger than Elias had imagined. The realization settled over Elias like a tightening noose. This killer was not acting alone. The 13th mask was a symptom of a deeper rot, a shadow embedded in Venice's very soul. His mission had just become infinitely more dangerous. As the meeting adjourned, Elias retreated into the night, the weight of new knowledge pressing heavily on his shoulders. The masquerade's glittering surface had been pierced, revealing the dark machinery beneath. Trust was a currency he could ill afford, and time was slipping away with every tick closer to the final night. He paused on a bridge overlooking a quiet canal, the water reflecting the fractured lights of the city. The echo of footsteps behind him made him turn sharply, but it was only Livia, her expression unreadable behind her mask. "We have enemies in every shadow," she said softly. "But so do they." Elias met her gaze, the lines of fatigue and resolve etched deep into his face. "Then we fight in the dark." Venice held its breath, poised on the edge of revelation and ruin. And Elias Vargo was caught in the heart of its deadly masquerade, where every mask concealed a lie, and every truth was a risk. The night had only just begun, and the game was far from over. The flickering gas lamps along the narrow alley cast long, wavering shadows on the ancient stones, interspersed with the soft lapping of water against weathered walls. It was the 5th night of the masquerade, and already the city seemed to pulse with a dangerous energy that Elias felt in his bones. He stopped at the edge of a narrow canal where the body had been discovered, carefully stepping around the cordon of local officers who gave him terse nods of acknowledgement. The victim lay face down, an elegant mask black with silver filigree still secured over the face, hiding the identity in death as much as life. The water beneath was dark, mirroring the murky secrets Elias was desperate to unravel. Elias crouched, his gloved fingers brushing lightly over the victim's hands, noting the delicate jewelry and the faint scent of jasmine clinging to the fabric of the victim's cloak. The scene was eerily still, but beneath the surface, Elias sensed the currents of deception swirling with increasing ferocity. The killer was no longer just a shadow in the crowd. He was sending a message, and Elias was beginning to understand the language. "Any witnesses?" Elias asked the attending officer without looking up. "None," the officer replied grimly. "The usual crowd masked and drunk. No one sees anything they want to admit." Elias's gaze drifted to the water, where the faint ripple of a passing gondola disturbed the silence. His mind raced through the details of the past nights, searching for a pattern, a clue that would break the killer's deadly code. As he rose, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Turning, Elias found Livia Conti approaching, her dark hair cascading over an ornate silver mask that shimmered under the lantern light. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, met his with a mix of concern and something Elias wasn't sure he trusted. "This is bad," she said softly, glancing down at the body. "The killer's escalating," Elias nodded, "and it's no coincidence. The victims, there's a pattern." Livia folded her arms, the delicate lace of her gloves contrasting with the steely edge in her voice. "I've heard whispers connections to your past missions. This isn't just random killing. It's personal." The weight of her words settled heavily on Elias. He had hoped to keep his history buried beneath layers of anonymity, but the killer was dragging it into the open, weaponizing memories he'd long tried to forget. Suddenly, a bustle of footsteps echoed behind them. Marco Bellini appeared, his rugged features drawn tight with exhaustion and resolve. He held a thick folder of documents and maps, slapping them down on a nearby stone bench. "We need to talk," Marco said brusquely. "There's been movement. Somebody's been tailing the suspects. I've got leads, but they're messy." Elias's eyes flicked between Livia and Marco, the uneasy alliance between the three of them tightening under the strain of the investigation. Trust was a fragile commodity here, and every step forward felt like a gamble. Later, in the dim confines of a small tavern nestled near the Rialto Bridge, Elias met with Sofia Marini. The bartender's sharp eyes missed nothing, and tonight she had information that could shift the balance. "I overheard something," Sofia whispered, leaning close so only Elias could hear. "A name keeps coming up, someone connected to your old unit." Elias's heart quickened. The circle was closing. The killer was drawing him in, forcing him to confront ghosts he'd hoped were buried forever. Outside, the city continued its masquerade, the masks and shadows concealing more than just faces. For Elias, the ticking clock was no longer just a measure of time, but a countdown to a reckoning that threatened to shatter everything he believed about trust, identity, and survival. As the fifth night drew to a close, Elias felt the cold grip of desperation tighten. The killer's pattern was clear now, and the next moves would be critical. One wrong step, one misplaced trust, and the cost could be fatal. He looked out over the glittering canals, the reflections fractured and distorted, a mirror of the fractured truths he had to piece together. The masquerade was no longer a festival. It was a battlefield, and the stakes had never been higher. Elias squared his shoulders and stepped back into the crowd, the mask settling over his face as the midnight bell tolled. The game was far from over, and the killer was waiting. Who will wear the next mask? Elias wondered, the question echoing inside him as the city held its breath. The marble beneath his feet was slick from a recent rain shower, and the faint echoes of distant laughter and music from the masquerade ball drifted through the labyrinthine streets. He paused momentarily, his breath visible in the chill, and glanced down at the water below. His reflection shimmered disjointedly, fragmented by the ripples, much like the fractured sense of reality that had begun to gnaw at him. Since his arrival, the game had grown ever more perilous, and tonight the lines between friend and foe blurred to an unbearable degree. The killer's ability to shift faces with every midnight stroke made every glance suspicious, every encounter fraught with unseen dangers. Yet it was not only the killer's masks that unsettled Elias, it was the masks his allies wore, the half-truths, the guarded glances, the silence where trust should have been. Elias's mind replayed the myriad conversations of the past days, each word now tainted with doubt. Livia Conti's charm, once a beacon of hope, now cast long shadows of uncertainty. Her loyalties seemed to shift like the tides, her information precious yet peppered with omissions. He remembered the last time they met, her eyes gleaming with an unspoken warning, her voice laced with hesitation. Was she protecting him or guarding secrets for her family's interests? He couldn't tell anymore. In the dim light of the tavern, the haze of smoke curled around Elias's thoughts as he recalled the confrontation with Livia. They had stood mere feet apart, yet a chasm yawned between them. Her words had cut sharp edges into the fragile alliance they'd built. "You think I'm playing both sides?" she had asked, a flicker of hurt beneath the defiance. Elias's reply was cold, his voice low. "I don't know what to think anymore." Outside the tavern, Marco Bellini waited, his expression a mixture of frustration and fatigue. Elias had trusted the detective, welcomed the pragmatism and streetwise insight he brought to their investigation. But even Marco's steady presence was now a source of tension. Their latest argument had left both men raw, their words echoing off the ancient walls of the alley. "You're too quick to suspect everyone," Marco had snapped, his voice rough and edged with exhaustion. "If you push everyone away, you'll end up alone." Elias had clenched his fists, the weight of betrayal pressing down harder than ever. "Better alone than dead," he'd retorted, the cold truth settling in his chest. As the masquerade's music swelled from the distance, Elias's thoughts were interrupted by a subtle touch on his arm. He turned sharply to find Sophia Marini, the bartender and occasional informant, pressing a folded note into his palm. Her eyes darted nervously around the crowded ballroom, her voice barely a whisper. "You need to read this. It's about the next mask." Elias unfolded the note, the ink smudged but legible, a cryptic warning of a betrayal yet to come. The weight of the message settled over him, mingling with the cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses. In this city of shifting masks and veiled truths, trust was a luxury he could ill afford. He slipped the note into his coat pocket and scanned the room, searching for familiar faces beneath the ornate masks. Each glance felt like a gamble. The killer was out there, blending seamlessly into the crowd, and Elias was running out of allies. The night deepened, shadows lengthening across the cobblestones. Elias felt the cold seep into his bones, not just from the Venetian chill, but from the growing isolation that wrapped around him like a second skin. The lines were blurring, not just between friend and foe, but within himself. The fractured reflections in the canal below mirrored the fracturing of his own identity. As the clock in the distant tower began its slow toll toward midnight, Elias steeled himself. The game was far from over, and the killer's next move was imminent. But as the masks fell and the faces shifted, the only certainty was that no one and nothing was as it seemed. Elias's breath hitched as the final chime echoed, melding with the distant murmur of the city. Somewhere in the darkness, the 13th mask awaited. And somewhere in the shadows, Elias's own truth was slipping further away. He took a deep breath, pulling his cloak tighter around him, and stepped back into the swirling tide of faces. The hunt was relentless, the stakes impossibly high, and the line between salvation and ruin had all but vanished. And so, amid the opulence and the deceit, Elias Varga plunged once more into the labyrinth of masks and lies, where every step could be his last and every face a deadly illusion. Elias Varga stood alone on a narrow stone bridge, the cold night air biting through his tailored coat. Around him, masked revelers drifted like ghosts, their laughter and muted conversations weaving a tapestry of sound that both comforted and unnerved him. The grand masquerade was at its height, yet for Elias, the festival's allure had turned sinister. Each face in the crowd was a potential killer, each mask a veil of deceit. He unfolded the worn piece of parchment in his gloved hands, his eyes scanning the cryptic symbols and hastily scrawled notes. The pattern was elusive and intricate cipher that seemed to bind the killer's shifting, identities to the ancient legends whispered in Venetian alleyways. Elias's mind raced to connect the dots, a secret society, a historical vendetta, and the chilling realization that the killer's masks were not random, they were messages, a dark language woven into the fabric of the city's masquerade. But the breakthrough came at a cost. His breath hitched, and a cold sweat prickled at his temples. The lines between ally and adversary blurred with every new discovery. Doubt clawed at his confidence, fraying the edges of his carefully constructed emotional armor. He was beginning to question himself, his instincts, his memories, even his own identity. Later, in the dim sanctuary of a tavern tucked away from the glittering chaos, Sophia Marini met him with a cautious smile. The bartender's sharp eyes flickered beneath her simple black half-mask as she leaned in, her voice a low murmur amid the clinking glasses and murmured conversations. "Rumors swirl thicker than the fog tonight," she whispered, sliding a folded note across the scarred wooden bar. "Whispers of a shadow within the shadow, someone playing all sides, wearing masks no one dares name." Elias's fingers trembled slightly as he accepted the note, the stale scent of aged wood and Venetian spice filling his senses. Trust was a currency too precious to squander, yet here he was, weighing the word of a bartender against the mounting evidence and his own gnawing paranoia. The following evening brought a lavish gala, a swirl of silk and jewels beneath ornate chandeliers. Elias found himself across the crowded ballroom from Livia Conti, her striking dark hair cascading over an elegant gown, her vibrant eyes gleaming behind an intricate golden mask. They held each other's gaze, a silent conversation heavy with unspoken questions and tentative alliances. Livia's loyalty was a question mark, her motives as enigmatic as the city itself. We're running out of time, Elias said quietly when their paths finally crossed, and the killer's game grows more dangerous. Livia's smile was tight, practiced. Venice has secrets that even the night fears to reveal. We must tread carefully. The tension between them was palpable, a fragile thread stretched thin by suspicion and necessity. Back in a cramped office cluttered with files and fading photographs, Marco Bellini slammed a dossier onto the desk. His rugged face was etched with frustration, the short beard rough against his clenched jaw. Cigarette smoke curled lazily from an ashtray, mingling with the stale air. "Elias, this obsession is going to get you killed," Marco snapped. "We're chasing shadows and you're losing grip on what's real." Elias met his gaze steadily, though the weight of doubt bore down on him. "If I don't catch him, more will die. I can't afford to falter." A heavy silence fell between them, the gulf between their perspectives widening. As the nights pressed on, the killer's elusive pattern remained just out of reach. Elias's emotional walls, once steadfast, began to crack beneath the relentless psychological assault. The masquerade's anonymity was a double-edged sword-shield for the killer and a prison for Elias's trust. Every mask concealed a new lie, every face a potential betrayal. The clock was ticking, and with each passing midnight, the stakes grew higher. Elias knew that to unmask the killer, he would have to confront not only the shifting faces of Venice's grand masquerade, but the fragile, fractured pieces of his own identity. The question was whether he could hold on long enough to see the final mask fall. As the chapter closed, Elias stood once more on that moonlit bridge, the city's shadows swirling around him like a living entity. Somewhere in the crowd, the sixth mask moved, silently waiting, watching, and ready to strike again. Elias's breath caught in his throat as the distant church bells began to toll midnight, a grim reminder that time was running out. "Who are you beneath the mask?" he whispered to the night. The silence that answered was suffocating. The chase was far from over. The masquerade's fluid identities were no longer just a backdrop to the killer's deadly game. They had invaded his own circle, turning allies into enemies in the blink of an eye. The evening air was thick with the scent of damp stone and the faint trace of jasmine as Elias sat alone in the shadowed corner of a quiet canal-side cafe. The low murmur of gondoliers drifting by mingled with the distant, haunting melody of a violin somewhere deep in the city's labyrinth. His fingers tapped restlessly on the wooden table, eyes scanning the faded map of Venice's hidden alleys and secret passages. Yet the map offered no comfort now. It was a labyrinth not just of the city, but of trust and deception. Livia Conti had seemed an invaluable ally, her keen intellect and insider knowledge of Venetian high society a beacon in the murky depths of the investigation. But the mask she wore was not merely ornamental. It concealed a duplicity that Elias had only just uncovered. The subtle slippa-coded message misdirected, a whispered conversation overheard had unmasked her betrayal. And it cut deeper than any blade. The confrontation had been inevitable. Elias found her later that night in a grand hall where the masquerade's opulence was on full display. Crystal chandeliers scattered fractured light across the marble floor. Guests danced obliviously, their laughter a cruel contrast to the tension simmering between the two. "Why, Livia?" Elias demanded, his voice low but edged with the raw hurt of personal breach. "You were supposed to help me." For a heartbeat, her mask faltered. The vibrant eyes that once sparked with camaraderie now flickered with guilt and something darker fear, perhaps. "You don't understand," she whispered, voice trembling yet resolute. "There are forces here you can't control. My family's legacy, the power structures woven into this masquerade. I had no choice," but her words rang hollow. Elias saw through the carefully crafted excuse, a thread in the web of lies that now entangled them all. Meanwhile, Marco Bellini's presence was a reluctant comfort. On the rain-slick streets beneath the flickering lamplight, his gruff pragmatism was a stark counterpoint to the swirling chaos. "You're losing ground," Marco warned, voice low but firm. "We can't afford more fractures in the team, but you've got to be smarter about who you trust." Elias nodded, the weight of isolation settling around him like a shroud. He knew Marco was right. The killer's game was not just about physical masks, but the facades people wore, the lies they told themselves and others. The betrayal was a brutal reminder that in this city of shifting faces, trust was the rarest currency. Back at the bustling tavern where whispered secrets flowed as freely as the wine, Sophia Morini watched Elias with keen eyes. Her role as an information broker was precarious, perched between the shadows and the light. Her voice, usually soft and measured, now carried an urgency that Elias could not ignore. "There's more at play than you realize," she warned, leaning closer so only he could hear. "The masquerade's not just a festival. It's a chessboard, and the pawns don't know they're being moved." Her words deepened Elias's resolve even as they underscored the dangers ahead. Every step forward was a gamble, every alliance a potential trap. That night, as Elias lay awake beneath the weight of the Venetian night, the relentless ticking of the clock echoed in his mind. 13 nights, 13 masks. And now the betrayal's price was painfully clear. In this deadly masquerade, trust could kill. The chapter closed with Elias staring out over the dark waters, the city's lights shimmering like fragmented truths. Somewhere beneath those reflections, the killer waited, faceless, flawless, and merciless. Elias knew one thing with grim certainty: to survive, he would have to become a master of deception himself, or be consumed by the very masks he sought to unmask. And as the clock neared midnight again, the game was far from over. Years of walking Venetian streets, chasing shadows and ghosts, had forged in him a rugged pragmatism and a thick skin, but also a stubbornness that had often put him at odds with others, especially Elias Varga. Yet tonight, in the dim, cramped back room of a tavern tucked away from the festival's glittering chaos, something shifted. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and stale wine, mingling with the low murmur of voices that slipped through the cracked door. Elias stood close to the table, his sharp eyes scanning the haphazard arrangement of photographs, notes, and scribbled diagrams. Each piece was a fragment of the killer's maddening puzzle: masks, victims, cryptic symbols, and whispered rumors. But it was Marco who bent over the table, fingers tracing a nearly imperceptible pattern that had eluded Elias's meticulous scrutiny. "Look here," Marco said quietly, his voice rough but steady. "These 3 victims each found near waterways, but not just any canals. They're all close to the old bridges, the ones less traveled during the festival. The killer's using the city's geography as a strategy." Elias frowned, then leaned in. "You think the killer is staging the murders with the bridges in mind, as markers?" Marco nodded, a flash of vindication lighting his weathered features. "Exactly, it's a breadcrumb trail. We've missed it because we were too focused on the masks and the victims' identities. But the locations, those bridges, they're the key. In that cramped space, amid flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows on peeling plaster walls, a fragile truce took shape." Elias looked up, eyes meeting Marco's with a newfound respect. "Good work. This changes everything." The breakthrough was more than a clue. It was a turning point. Marco's insight cut through the fog of confusion, giving Elias a thread to follow. For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope ignited. Later, in the hushed stillness of a palazzo's private chamber, Elias and Marco confronted the ghosts that had long shadowed their uneasy partnership. The room was cold, the air heavy with unspoken regrets and memories of past failures. Elias broke the silence, voice low but earnest. "I know I haven't made this easy. Your trust means more than you realize." Marco's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Neither of us is perfect. We've both got scars. But if we're going to stop this, we need to be on the same side. No more second guessing." Their hands brushed briefly, a gesture small but charged with significance. Trust, once elusive, began to take root. As twilight draped Venice in a soft golden glow, the 2 men walked through a bustling square alive with festival revelry. Livia Conti appeared like a shadow stepping from the crowd, her dark eyes gleaming with urgency. "I have information that might help," she said, voice steady but edged with tension. "But you need to act fast. The secret society pulling strings behind the masquerade is more dangerous than we thought." Her revelation added layers to the investigation, deepening the political intrigue and raising the stakes. Elias and Marco exchanged a glance, the weight of the city's secrets pressing down upon them. Nightfall found them standing at the edge of a canal, the water's surface a mirror to the shimmering lights of masked revelers. Fog curled low, muffling the distant music and laughter. The moment was quiet but charged, the calm before the storm. "We've got to keep moving," Elias said. No room for mistakes now. Marco's gaze was steady, the resolve in his eyes matching Elias's own, together. As the masquerade's shifting faces danced in the distance, the two men forged a fragile alliance, their combined strength and newfound trust the best weapon against the killer who wore a different face each night. But beneath the surface, the shadows of betrayal and deception still lurked, threatening to unravel everything. The city held its breath, and so did they. The game was far from over. The candle's flicker cast long shadows across the cluttered table where Elias and Marco pored over maps and photographs. Outside, the muffled sounds of the masquerade, the laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses seemed a world away. Here, in the dim light, the hunt for the 13th mask was gaining momentum. "Look at this," Marco said, pointing to a series of faded notes pinned beside a map of Venice. "The killer isn't just picking victims at random. Each murder happened close to a bridge that's significant historically places tied to secrets, betrayals, old vendettas." Elias leaned in, tracing the thin red lines Marco had drawn connecting the dots. "So this killer is playing a deeper game, one that uses the city's history as a weapon." "Exactly," Marco replied. "And that means the next move won't be random, either. It's planned, calculated." Elias felt a chill. The killer's mind was more intricate than he'd imagined. That night, the tension between the two men eased, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Marco's redemption wasn't just about the case, it was about reclaiming his own honor, proving to himself and to Elias that he was more than his past mistakes. As the hours slipped by, their partnership solidified a beacon of trust in a city where everyone wore a mask, and nothing was as it seemed. The clock was ticking. And now, with Marco's breakthrough, Elias felt a spark of hope flicker in the darkness. But in Venice, shadows never stayed buried for long. The masquerade continued, each mask hiding a secret, each secret a step closer to the truth or to oblivion. And somewhere, the 13th mask smiled behind another face. The chapter closes on Elias and Marco standing together beneath the ghostly glow of a street lamp, their breaths mingling in the cold night air. The distant sounds of the festival pulse faintly through the fog, a reminder of the fragile world they strive to protect. Their eyes meet an unspoken promise hanging between them. The hunt is far from over, but for the first time in many nights, they are not alone. The seventh victim lay crumpled on the cold stone beneath a flickering lantern, the delicate mask shattered beside the body. Elias knelt, his gloved hand brushing lightly over the victim's face, trying to imprint every detail into his memory. The mask had been different this time, more elaborate, more personal, and it carried a message that hit him deep. The victim was someone Elias had seen before, someone whose name dredged up memories he had tried hard to bury. The killer's game was no longer just a deadly puzzle. It was a personal vendetta, a shadow reaching into Elias's fractured past. The cold dread in Elias's chest tightened as he stared at the broken mask. This was no random killing. It was a calculated move, a message meant to unnerve him and draw him closer to the edge. He rose slowly, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. As he exited the alley, the distant strains of a gondolier's song floated up, haunting and melancholic, a stark contrast to the violence he had just witnessed. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of the past with the present nightmare. He needed answers, but every step forward seemed to plunge him deeper into a labyrinth of deception. Back in the heart of the masquerade, Elias found Livia Conti waiting in a private salon of a grand palazzo. The room was bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, casting flickering shadows on the ornate frescoes. Livia's eyes shone with a mixture of concern and guarded calculation as Elias recounted the grim discovery. Their conversation was low and charged, the air thick with suspicion. "You need to be careful, Elias," Livia warned, her voice barely above a whisper. "This killer knows more than we thought, and so do you." But trust is a scarce commodity in Venice tonight. Elias met her gaze steadily, though inside the unease gnawed at him. Their alliance, forged in necessity, was strained by secrets and half-truths. Yet, in this moment, he had no choice but to rely on her insight into the city's elite and the hidden currents beneath the festivity. Meanwhile, Marco Bellini worked tirelessly in the cramped evidence room of the local precinct. The scent of old parchment mingled with the briny air from the nearby canals, a constant reminder of the city's dual nature, beauty and decay intertwined. He sifted through the growing pile of clues, frustration mounting with each dead end. But beneath the surface, a steely resolve took hold. Marco knew this was his chance for redemption, to make amends for past failures by helping Elias unravel the killer's pattern. At the same time, Sofia Marini moved through the masquerade's shadows, her keen eyes and ears gathering whispers and rumors like precious currency. At a dimly lit bar thick with the scent of spiced wine and smoke, she leaned close to Elias, her voice urgent but cautious. There's talk of a connection, a name whispered in Venetian circles linked to the victim and the killer's masks. It's dangerous information, but you need to hear it. Elias listened intently, the kaleidoscope of swirling masks and music around them fading into the background. Each new piece of information tightened the noose around the elusive killer, but the cost was clear. The closer Elias moved to the truth, the more his own identity fractured under the relentless pressure. As the seventh night unfolded, the masquerade's glittering facade grew darker. Shadows lengthening both in the city's twisting alleys and within Elias's mind. The killer's design was becoming terrifyingly clear. This was a game of psychological chess, and Elias was both the hunter and the hunted. With the clock ticking relentlessly toward midnight, every decision bore weight, and every mask concealed a deeper secret. The chapter closed with Elias staring out over the Grand Canal from a dimly lit balcony, the water reflecting the shimmering lights of the carnival below. His breath was shallow, his thoughts a turbulent storm. The seventh mask had fallen, but the killer's true face remained hidden. And as the night deepened, Elias realized that to catch the ghost in the crowd, he would have to confront not only the enemy, but the shadows lurking within himself. The city whispered its secrets in the language of masks and mirrors, and Elias knew the final act was drawing near. But who would be left standing when the last mask fell? The masquerade festival's vibrant colors and raucous laughter had faded into whispers carried by the damp breeze. Elias Varga moved with deliberate stealth through the narrow alleys, his dark cloak blending with the shadows. The slick cobblestones glistened with recent rain, reflecting the scattered lanterns that flickered like ghosts in the mist. Ahead, beyond a wrought iron gate veiled in ivy, a faint murmur of voices rose low, urgent and conspiratorial. Elias paused, his breath shallow, eyes narrowing as he adjusted the leather strap of his mask, the cold metal pressing lightly against his skin. Tonight, the game was no longer just a hunt for a killer. It was a battle against an invisible enemy pulling strings from the city's hidden core. He slipped past the gate, careful to avoid the creaking hinges, and ducked behind a marble column framing the entrance to a secluded courtyard. There, beneath the flickering glow of wrought iron sconces, a circle of masked figures convened. Their faces obscured by intricate Venetian masks, some gilded with gold filigree, others stark and menacing, each carried an air of authority and menace. Elias's eyes darted between them, recording their every gesture, voice inflection, and the subtle shifts in their posture. This was the secret society whispered about in hushed corners, the shadowy puppeteers of the masquerade's chaos. Their influence was no longer speculation. It was the cold truth threatening to unravel the investigation. A figure with a raven-black mask spoke, his voice smooth but laced with steel. "The time draws near. Our interests must be protected at all costs." The agent grows bolder, but he treads on thin ice. A woman's voice, sharp and commanding, responded, "We cannot afford missteps. The masquerade is our shield and the city our stage. Let the agent chase shadows while we tighten our grip." Elias clenched his fists, the weight of the revelation crushing yet galvanizing him. If the killer was a ghost hiding behind shifting faces, this society was the dark current beneath the Venetian waters, pulling all into its depths. The next day, Elias found himself in the opulent drawing room of a palazzo, its walls draped with crimson velvet and adorned with centuries-old tapestries. Livia Conti sat across from him, her elegant form poised with practiced grace. Her dark hair fell in glossy waves, and her eyes, normally vibrant and unreadable, held a flicker of something unfamiliar, caution. "You're playing a dangerous game," Livia warned, her voice low but firm. "These people don't just wield power, they devour those who stand against them." Elias met her gaze steadily. "I don't have the luxury of stepping back." "Not this time." She sighed, a shadow crossing her face. "Just remember, loyalty in Venice is a currency more volatile than the tides. Trust can be bought and betrayed with the same coin." Their uneasy alliance deepened, tension threading through every exchanged word and guarded glance. Elias knew that Livia's loyalties were as complex as the city itself. She was both a guide and a potential hazard. Meanwhile, Marco Bellini worked tirelessly in the dim light of his cramped office, the scent of stale coffee mingling with the musty air. He spread out maps, documents, and photographs, his weathered fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. His rugged face, marked by years on the Venetian streets, was etched with determination. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of names connected by red lines. "Every official we suspect has ties to this society. They control the masquerade, the police, even the courts." Elias leaned in, the grim weight of corruption settling over them. "It's worse than I thought. We're not just hunting a killer, we're confronting an entire system?" The question of how far to go gnawed at Elias as the days passed. Alone on a gondola, he floated silently beneath the moonlit sky, the water reflecting his distorted image. The city's lights danced on the surface, fragmented and elusive, much like the truth he sought. He wrestled with the lines blurred between justice and vengeance, legality and necessity. To expose the society, he might have to bend the very rules he swore to uphold. Could he cross those lines without losing himself? The chapter closed on Elias's face, a mask of resolve tempered by doubt, as the gondola glided into the darkness. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was shrouded in shadows darker than any mask. With every step deeper into Venice's underbelly, Elias faced the chilling reality that the masquerade was more than a festival. It was a battlefield where the distinction between friend and foe, right and wrong, had all but vanished. And in this city of masks, the greatest danger might come not from the killer he pursued, but from the man he might become. From his vantage point on a crumbling balcony overlooking the Grand Piazza, Elias Varga surveyed the masquerade below. The kaleidoscope of swirling masks and ornate costumes moved like a living tide beneath the flickering lanterns, each face as inscrutable as the last. The air was thick with the heavy scent of spiced wine and the faint undertone of something darker fear, perhaps, or the lingering trace of the killer's presence. Elias's gray eyes scanned the crowd, seeking the eighth incarnation of the 13th mask. The killer's ability to slip seamlessly from one identity to another had confounded him for nights, each new face a cipher he struggled to decode. Tonight, the stakes felt higher, as if the masquerade itself had grown more sinister, the laughter more hollow, the shadows deeper. The distant notes of a violin floated through the air, weaving a haunting melody that seemed to mock his futile search. His thoughts were interrupted by a subtle movement nearby. Turning, Elias spotted Sofia Marini emerging from the dim entrance of a nearby tavern. Her sharp gaze met his, and with a barely perceptible nod, she beckoned him inside. Inside the tavern, the atmosphere was thick with smoke and murmurs. Candlelight flickered against the worn wood, casting dancing shadows on the faces of patrons lost in their own secrets. Sophia leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper amid the ambient clamor. "Rumors swirl faster than the gondolas, Elias," she said, eyes darting toward the door. "The eighth mask is more than a disguise, it's a message. Someone close is playing a deadly game." Elias felt a chill despite the warmth of the room, Sophia's fingers tightened around her glass. "I don't know yet, but trust is a luxury we can't afford. Be careful who you watch and who watches you." Her words echoed in his mind as he left the tavern, the masquerade's music swelling outside like a sinister heartbeat. He found Marco Bellini waiting near the canal's edge, his rugged features taut with concern. "Another mask," Marco said grimly. "And another body? They're tightening the noose." Elias nodded, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. "The killer's game is evolving. We have to be smarter." Their uneasy partnership was a fragile thread holding together the unraveling investigation. The killer's new face was not just a mask, it was a challenge. One that would force Elias to confront betrayals he had long feared. Later, in the twisting back alleys where the city's lights dimmed to near darkness, Elias encountered a figure whose mask shifted subtly with each movement, a blur of emotions too quick to read. The confrontation was a dance of shadows and half-truths, each word loaded with hidden meaning. "You think you know me," the masked figure hissed, voice laced with venom and mockery. "But the truth is a mask worn by us all." Elias's heart pounded. The lines between hunter and hunted blurred, and doubt gnawed at him. Was this the killer or another pawn in a deadly game? The night deepened, and Elias found himself in a secluded garden with Livia Conti. The scent of night jasmine hung heavy in the air as they spoke in hushed tones. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You're chasing ghosts, Elias," she said softly. "But some masks hide wounds deeper than you realize." Their conversation laid bare the fractures in their alliance, the unspoken fears and betrayals lurking beneath polished veneers. As the midnight hour approached, Elias stood alone amidst the revelry, the masquerade's dark heart beating all around him. The eighth mask was a warning and a promise in escalation that left no room for error. Trust was scarce, and every shadow could be a threat. With every passing second, the killer's game tightened, and Elias knew the path ahead would demand sacrifices not just of others but of himself. The masquerade was no longer just a festival of masks. It was a crucible where identity, loyalty, and survival were tested to their breaking points. The night whispered its deadly secret. In Venice, beneath the veneer of celebration, the true mask was the one Elias wore himself. And as the clock ticked down, the question remained, who was the man behind the mask? And could he outwit a killer who changed faces like a ghost in the fog? The city held its breath, and so did Elias. The game was far from over.
Within the ornate walls of a centuries-old palazzo, Livia Conti lingered by the towering window, her gaze tracing the rippling reflections on the canal below. The mask she had worn earlier that evening now rested heavy in her hand, a weight symbolizing the dual lives she led. The laughter and music from the festivities drifted faintly, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. Every heartbeat echoed the conflict that churned beneath her composed exterior. Her family's legacy, steeped in power and tradition, demanded allegiance and silence. Yet, the path she had begun to walk alongside Elias Vargan, agent driven by relentless pursuit of truth, pulled her toward a dangerous defiance. She could feel the invisible chains of loyalty tighten, threatening to bind her to a fate she no longer wished to accept. A soft knock at the door shattered the fragile quiet. Elias entered, his presence commanding yet weighed by exhaustion. His piercing grey eyes, usually masked by calculated calm, now flickered with a raw intensity that pierced through the layers of pretense. "Livia," he began, voice low but urgent, "we're running out of time. The masquerade's shadows grow darker, and every moment you hesitate, the killer gains ground. I need to know where you stand." She met his gaze, searching for trust amid the tangled web of deceit. "You ask a heavy question," she replied, fingers tightening around the mask. "My family's expectations are not easily cast aside, but this masquerade, it's become a battleground far beyond their ambitions." Outside, the distant chime of a bell marked the hour, a reminder of the relentless ticking clock that governed their lives. Elias stepped closer, the chill in the air matching the tension between them. "Help me unmask the killer, Livia. Your knowledge could turn the tide. But if you waver, if you betray me—" "I know the stakes," she interrupted, voice steady despite the turmoil. But betrayal has many faces here. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Marco Bellini, the local detective whose gruff pragmatism had become an uneasy pillar in Elias's investigation. Marco's weathered features softened as he addressed Livia. "You're caught between worlds, but the city needs allies who choose wisely. We can't afford divided loyalties now." Livia regarded Marco carefully, the flickering candlelight casting shifting patterns that seemed to mirror the ambiguity of trust between them. "I'll aid you," she declared, the decision crystallizing in her tone. "But know this, I act not just for justice, but to protect what remains of my family." The alliance forged in that moment was tenuous yet vital, a fragile thread amid the masquerade's intricate tapestry of deceit. As they spoke, the sounds of Venice's restless night ebbed and flowed, a symphony of secrets whispered on the wind. Later, Livia found herself alone on a narrow bridge arching over the mist-covered canal. The mask she now wore concealed half her face, a metaphor for the choice she had embraced and the uncertain road that lay ahead. The water below mirrored the fragmented light of lanterns, distorting reflections much like the shifting identities that haunted the festival. In the distance, the festival continued unabated, a swirling dance of masks and shadows where trust was scarce and danger ever present. Livia's breath caught as she pondered the consequences of her choice, an irrevocable step that might save or doom them all. Meanwhile, Elias, armed with Livia's intelligence, prepared to navigate the treacherous maze of alliances and betrayals that defined the masquerade's dark heart. Each revelation brought them closer to the elusive killer, yet the closer they came, the more fragile their trust became. The chapter closed on a note of tense anticipation, the city's labyrinthine canals reflecting the fractured identities and fractured loyalties that would determine the fate of all entwined in the deadly game. The night was far from over, and with Livia's choice made, the stakes had never been higher. Elias's next moves would have to be precise, for in Venice, beneath the shifting masks, no secret remained hidden forever. And as the clock edged closer to midnight, the question lingered. Who would pay the price of betrayal when the masks finally fell?
Elias Varga sat hunched in a small, shadowed corner of a canal-side cafe, the flickering candlelight casting sharp angles across his gaunt face. Around him, the sounds of the masquerade, masked laughter, a violin's melancholy wail, footsteps on cobblestones, mingled with the distant splash of oars, a symphony of secrets and shifting identities. But Elias was not here to revel. He was here to unmask a killer who wore a new face each night. His fingers trembled slightly as they flipped through the dog-eared pages of his notes, where sketches of masks and names, dates and places interwove with cryptic observations and tentative conclusions. The killer's pattern was becoming clearer now, a puzzle slowly assembling despite the chaos of the masquerade's ceaseless shifting. Each mask was not random, it was a calculated signpost, a message encrypted in deception. The victims were not merely targets. They were pieces in a game that stretched back into Elias's own fractured past. A sharp knock on the cafe's weathered door broke his focus. Livia Conti slipped inside, her dark eyes scanning the room before settling on him. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator cloaked in silk and mystery, her elaborate mask catching the candlelight in glinting facets. "You should not linger here so openly," she whispered, sliding into the seat opposite him. "The city watches, Elias, and so does the killer." Elias pressed his lips tightly, a brief flicker of vulnerability flashing in his gray eyes. "I have little choice. The pattern points to the final mask. I think I know who it will be, but the clock is against us." Livia's gaze sharpened. "And you? Are you against yourself?" "You look worn," he swallowed hard. The relentless pressure of the last nights had begun to erode his resolve. The faces around him blurred and twisted in his mind, allies indistinguishable from foes, truth from betrayal. The killer's ability to manipulate identity was not just a threat outside, it was tearing at Elias's own sense of self. Their whispered exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Marco Bellini, the gruff, pragmatic detective whose skepticism was as palpable as the Venetian humidity. Marco's presence was a grounding force, a reminder that beneath the masquerade's illusions lay real danger and real stakes. "Enough shadows," Marco said, slamming a thick dossier onto the table. "Look at this. We have names, connections, evidence that ties these masks to people in the city's elite and to your past." Elias leaned over the dossier, the harsh fluorescent light of the precinct replacing the cafe's warm candle glow. The files detailed meetings, financial transactions, and whispered rumors, stitching together a tapestry of conspiracy and vendetta. Yet even as the evidence mounted, Elias's mind wavered. Paranoia gnawed at him, whispering that even Marco and Livia might wear masks beneath their masks. "We don't have time for doubts," Marco said, catching the hesitation in Elias's gaze. "You're not alone in this. Trust the facts, not the fears." But trust was a currency Elias had spent too freely in the past, only to be left bankrupt and exposed. As twilight deepened into night, Elias found himself on a narrow balcony overlooking the Grand Canal, the city's heartbeat pulsing beneath the glittering masks and swirling gowns of the festival. The bells of the nearby campanile tolled the hour, their echoes folding into the mist like a countdown to doom. The ticking clock motif was no longer metaphorical. It was a hammer driving at his temples, a reminder that each passing minute brought the killer closer to the final, deadly act. The carnival's joyous facade masked a darker truth, and Elias was caught in its deadly dance. The pattern was clear, the stakes higher than ever, but the lines between hunter and hunted, friend and foe, were dissolving into shadows. Could he hold on to his fractured identity long enough to unmask the 13th mask? Or would the relentless pressure of time and betrayal break him first? The night deepened, the masquerade's music rising to a fevered pitch. Elias's breath fogged in the chill air as he prepared for the battles yet to come, the final masks yet to fall, and the last truths yet to be revealed. The candlelight flickered, throwing wavering shadows onto the maps and photographs, the dim glow reflecting the tenuous hold they had on the truth. Around him, Livia Conti's sharp eyes scanned the details, fingers tracing the inked lines of anonymous notes, while Marco Bellini leaned forward, brows furrowed beneath his weathered face. "We're close," Elias murmured, voice low but steady, his gaze locked onto the intersection of clues that had eluded them for so long. "The secret society's grip is weakening. These patterns, they're no mistake. Someone wants us to find them." Livia's lips curved into a faint, guarded smile. "Or they want us to think that disinformation is their game. We can't afford to be complacent." Marco nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "The streets whisper differently now. The usual shadows are moving, and not all of them are friendly." Elias felt the weight of the ticking clock pressing heavier with each passing moment. The masquerade's shifting faces and hidden agendas had conspired to keep the killer one step ahead for too long. Yet tonight, the disparate clues-coded messages intercepted by Alessandra Fiore, cryptic symbols found at crime scenes, and the subtle shifts in the political undercurrents of Venetian high society began to weave into a coherent picture. A secure line crackled to life, Alessandra's voice sharp and urgent. "Elias, the latest decrypted transmissions confirm fractures within the society's inner circle. Some members are turning against each other. This is the leverage we need." The room's tension shifted, a spark of hope igniting amid the shadows. "Good," Elias replied, fingers tightening into a fist. "We use their discord. We expose the fractures before they can regroup." Livia's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. "But exposing them means we also expose ourselves? The stakes are higher than ever." The masquerade around them, with its glittering masks and whispered lies, was more than a backdrop, is the battleground. As Elias prepared to move forward, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the night air was thick with fog, muffling the sounds of the canals and cloaking the streets in mystery. Later, standing on a fog-shrouded bridge, Marco surveyed the dark waters. His mind replayed the uneasy alliances they had forged, the betrayals narrowly avoided, and the relentless pressure to keep the killer from striking again. The chill wind tugged at his coat, a reminder of the fragility of their position. Back inside the palazzo, Elias paced, thoughts racing. The countdown to the final confrontation was accelerating. Each revelation brought them closer to the killer and closer to danger. The secret society's retaliation was inevitable, but so was Elias's resolve. "We've unraveled their threads," he said to Livia and Marco as they gathered once more. "Now we prepare to cut them, for good." As the clock edged toward midnight, the masquerade's glittering facade masked a city on the brink of upheaval, and Elias stood at the eye of the storm, ready to face the final test. The threads of deception, betrayal, and shifting identity were pulling taut, and only the strongest would survive the unraveling. The carnival's gaiety was a distant echo here, replaced by the cold bite of night and the creeping sense of dread that had clung to him since the killer's 10th mask had surfaced. His breath formed brief clouds in the chilly air, mingling with the faint smell of damp stone and distant canal water. Each step felt heavier, burdened by the weight of the relentless chase and the knowledge that the killer was always one step ahead. Inside the palazzo, shadows danced menacingly across frescoed walls and chipped marble floors. The faint flicker of candlelight cast long, sinister shapes, hiding secrets in every corner. Elias's senses sharpened, every creak and whisper catching his attention. The muffled toll of church bells in the distance marked the passing hours, a grim reminder of the ticking clock that governed his mission. He paused briefly in a grand hall, its high ceilings adorned with ornate chandeliers now dulled by dust. The scent of incense lingered faintly, mingling with the mustiness of forgotten grandeur. Elias's eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle signs of a struggle, a displaced chair, a shattered glass on the floor. The killer was close. A sudden noise startled him, a soft click followed by the faint hiss of a concealed mechanism. Reflexively, Elias dove to the side as a hidden blade sliced through the air where he had just stood. His heart hammered in his chest as he rolled behind a marble pillar, the metallic scent of danger sharp in his nostrils. The room fell deathly silent, save for his ragged breathing and the distant city sounds muffled by thick walls. From the shadows emerged a figure, wearing the 10th mask of the killer, an unsettling porcelain face, smooth and expressionless, its hollow eyes seeming to pierce Elias's very soul. The figure moved with unnerving grace, a predator relishing the hunt. Elias's mind raced, weighing options, searching for an escape, for a weapon, for a flaw in the killer's facade. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the entrance. Marco Bellini and Livia Conti appeared, their masked faces tense with worry. Marco's hand rested on the grip of his service weapon, eyes scanning the darkness, while Livia's gaze flickered between Elias and the intruder, calculating risk and opportunity. The killer hesitated, the moment stretching, laden with silent threats and unspoken challenges. Elias seized the distraction, lunging for a nearby candelabrum and swinging it with desperate force. The porcelain mask cracked, revealing a glimpse of the killer's true face before they melted back into the shadows, disappearing like a specter. Breathing heavily, Elias sank against the cold stone, adrenaline mixing with the ache of a narrow escape. The encounter had been a brutal reminder. The killer was growing bolder, the game more dangerous. Trust was a fragile currency, and the masquerade's masks concealed more than just faces. They hid lethal intentions and fractured loyalties. As the three regrouped, the weight of the coming nights pressed relentlessly upon them. The final masks awaited, each a step closer to the killer, and to the truth that Elias feared might shatter everything he believed. The city's labyrinthine canals whispered secrets, and amid the swirling masks and shifting shadows, Elias knew one thing with chilling clarity: the endgame had begun. The clock chimed midnight, its toll echoing through the palazzo and into Elias's very soul. He was out of time and out of safe ground. The hunt was no longer just for the killer's identity, but for his own survival. And as the echoes faded, so did the last vestiges of certainty. Who was the hunter? Who was the hunted? And when the 10th mask fell, what truth would remain beneath? The answer lay hidden in the heart of Venice's darkness, waiting for the final act to unfold. Elias Varga stood at the edge of the room, his gaze sharp beneath the shadow of his own mask, eyes scanning every shifting face. The masquerade was a symphony of deception, and tonight the notes grew discordant. Livia Conti approached, her steps measured and elegant, the intricate filigree of her mask shimmering like dark water. "Elias," she whispered, her voice a silk thread pulled taut with urgency. "We need to talk privately." He nodded, following her through a maze of gilded hallways until they reached a dimly lit chamber where the flicker of candlelight cast long shadows on ancient Venetian frescoes. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old stone. "I had hoped to shield you from this," Livia began, her eyes darting nervously. "But the truth is out. Marco's informant was compromised. There's a leak among us." Elias's jaw tightened. "A leak? Who?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "I don't know for certain yet, but it's someone close. Someone we trusted." The sting of betrayal was bitter and cold, seeping into the fragile trust Elias had built. "We can't afford fractures now," he said quietly. "Not with the killer still at large." Outside, the festive music swelled and waned, a haunting reminder of the masquerade's dual nature, celebration and subterfuge entwined in a deadly dance. Meanwhile, on a fog-drenched bridge spanning a narrow canal, Marco Bellini stood solitary, the smoke from his cigarette curling upward into the mist. His weathered face was etched with the heavy lines of regret and resolve. He thought of the city's shadows, the secrets whispered in alleyways, and the fragile bond he'd forged with Elias amid the chaos. "This city demands sacrifices," he muttered to himself, crushing the cigarette beneath his boot. "And I'm still paying for mine." Back within the labyrinth of Venice's twisting waterways, Elias found a moment's solace aboard a gondola gliding silently beneath a moonlit sky. The party's distant laughter and music faded into whispers, leaving only the gentle splash of oars and the ghostly echo of his thoughts. He was alone with the weight of a mission that had become more personal than professional, the lines between friend and foe blurring until every shadow seemed a threat. The killer's many faces haunted him, a relentless reminder that identity was mutable, fragile, and dangerously elusive. That night, a clandestine meeting was arranged in a secluded courtyard shrouded by ancient stone walls and blooming jasmine. Elias, Marco, and Livia gathered beneath the watchful gaze of gargoyles carved centuries ago, their voices low but urgent. "We have to pool what we know," Elias urged, his eyes flicking to the silhouettes lurking in the darkness beyond. "The killer's next move will come at midnight. We need to be ready." Livia nodded, producing a folded note inscribed with cryptic symbols tied to the secret society manipulating the masquerade's strings. Marco laid out street-level intelligence, a map of recent murders and possible escape routes. The fragile alliance held, but beneath the surface, the undercurrents of mistrust churned. Elias felt the crushing loneliness of command, the burden of knowing that one wrong step could shatter what little hope remained. "We're running out of time," Marco said grimly. "And I'm not sure who's watching us." Elias swallowed hard, the weight of the masquerade pressing down like the masks they all wore, beautiful, deceptive, and suffocating. As the clock edged toward midnight, Elias's mind raced with questions. Who among them carried secrets darker than the night? Could he rely on Livia's loyalty, or was her allegiance swayed by shadows of her own? Was Marco's rugged pragmatism enough to anchor them against the storm? The answers lay hidden beneath layers of masks and lies, and the killer watched, waiting to strike once more. In the swirling dance of allies and enemies, Elias stood poised on the knife's edge, knowing that the next betrayal could be his last. The masquerade's final act was approaching, and with it, the reckoning for all. The night deepened, the city held its breath, and Elias's resolve hardened. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford, but survival demanded he gamble everything on the fragile bonds forged in shadows. And as the bells tolled midnight, the dance began anew, a deadly waltz where only the cunning would survive, and the masks would finally start to fall. The city seemed to hold its breath, the usual revelry of the masquerade subdued beneath a growing cloud of unease. Tonight, the line between hunter and hunted blurred irrevocably. and the shadows of the past clawed their way into the twisting labyrinth of the present. Elias sat alone in the corner of a dimly lit room within a centuries-old palazzo, the faint scent of aged wood and melted wax lingering in the air. Before him lay a collection of fragile documents and photographs, their edges curling with time, each one a piece of a puzzle he had dreaded confronting. Across the room, Livia Conti stood poised but visibly unsettled, her dark eyes sharp yet clouded with something deeper regret, perhaps, or fear. "You need to see this," Elias said, his voice low but steady, not quite masking the tremor beneath. He slid a faded photograph across the table, an image of himself alongside a colleague long lost to a failed operation, the memory of that night still raw. Livia's gaze flickered to the picture, then back to Elias. "I thought you knew," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The killer, he's not just some random threat. He's connected to that night, to your past." The room seemed to constrict, the walls drawing closer as Elias absorbed the truth. The killer, the ghost who had worn a dozen faces, who had toyed with his mind and sanity, was a living echo of his deepest wounds. The revelation shattered the fragile veneer of control Elias had maintained. His pulse quickened, memories cascading in vivid torrent shouts in the dark, the sharp crack of gunfire, a scream cut short. Outside, the faint murmur of the masquerade festival drifted through cracked windows, a stark contrast to the darkness within. Elias's mind raced, the ticking clock louder than ever, each second counting down to an uncertain, deadly conclusion. Later that night, under the shroud of a cold, mist-laden sky, Elias and Marco Bellini crouched beside a narrow canal, the water below reflecting flickers of gaslight like fractured glass. The murmur of the city was subdued, the usual clatter of gondoliers replaced by the quiet drip of water and their hushed voices. "We're running out of time," Marco muttered, his breath visible in the chill air. "Whoever this is, they're playing us, using the masquerade's chaos as a shield." Elias nodded, eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "And now I know why. It's personal, too personal." The weight of that knowledge bore down on him, thickening the air with paranoia. Every face in the crowd could be the killer's new mask, every smile a lie. Trust was a currency he could no longer afford. Back at a secure location, Alessandra Fiore's voice crackled through the encrypted line, steady and precise despite the tension transmitting through the connection. "Elias, the data we've pulled from the masquerade's networks points to patterns that align with your past operations. The killer's movements aren't random, they're calculated, almost as if challenging you." Elias clenched his fists, the sterile glow of the monitor illuminating the anguish in his eyes. "It's a game of shadows," he said, voice tight. "But this time, the shadows know me." Alessandra's calm tone was a fragile anchor against the storm. "You're not alone, we'll get through this." But as the line went dead, Elias felt the isolation deepen. The mask of professionalism slipping to reveal the man beneath, fractured, vulnerable, yet unyielding. Hours later, he found himself standing alone on one of Venice's ancient bridges, the city around him cloaked in fog and silence. The distant tolling of church bells marked the passage of time, each chime a reminder of the relentless countdown. The water beneath rippled softly, mirroring the turmoil within. Faces from his past floated through his mind, blurred and indistinct like the masks worn by the festival's guests. The killer's shadow loomed closer, a specter of betrayal and pain intertwined with Elias's own scars. He exhaled slowly, the chill air filling his lungs as he grappled with the fracture in his identity. Could he separate the man from the mission? Could he trust himself as much as those around him? Tonight, the 11th night, was no longer just a point on the calendar. It was a crossroads where past and present collided and where Elias's resolve would be tested like never before. The masquerade's masks might conceal faces, but they could not hide the truths waiting to be confronted. And Elias knew the final nights would demand everything he had and more. As the midnight hour approached, a whisper of movement caught his attention. Somewhere in the shifting crowd, the killer wore a new face. And this time, Elias was ready to face the darkness within as much as the threat without. The game was far from over. The true reckoning was only just beginning. Moonlight spilled like liquid silver from the fractured sky, filtering through the gnarled branches of an ancient cypress. casting a mosaic of shadows that danced on the weathered stone walls. The air was heavy, pregnant with silence, broken only by the distant murmur of laughter and the soft lapping of canal waters nearby, a haunting lullaby that belied the danger lurking within the masked throng. Elias's breath was steady, despite the tightening knot in his chest. This was the 12th night, and the mask he sought was close, so close, he could almost taste the bitter tang of betrayal mingling with the salt of the sea breeze. Every step forward was a step deeper into the killer's labyrinth, a game played with razor-sharp precision and a cruelty that chilled the bones. Ahead, the figure waited beneath the skeletal branches, a silhouette framed by flickering torchlight. The mask he wore was a masterwork of macabre artistry, a cracked porcelain visage, pale and fractured like a shattered mirror, the hollow eyes dark voids that seemed to swallow light. The edges of the mask caught the torch's flame, casting eerie reflections that danced like spirits in torment. Elias's gaze locked onto the figure, his mind racing through every clue, every whispered rumor, every fragment of truth and deception tangled in the masquerade's web. The killer was here, and with him came the weight of all the lies and betrayals that had led Elias to this moment. "Elias Varga!" The killer's voice was a low, velvety rasp, laced with mockery and something darker and intimate knowledge that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. "You've come far, but do you truly know who you are?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, an accusation. Elias's mind flashed to the shattered pieces of his past, the colleague lost in the botched operation, the fractured identity he wore like a second skin, the creeping paranoia that gnawed at his resolve. From the shadows, a soft rustle announced Livia's presence. She stepped forward, her silver filigree mask catching the torchlight, her dark eyes sharp and unreadable. "Elias," she said quietly, "be careful. This game is far from over." Marco Bellini lingered at the edge of the courtyard, his hand resting near the concealed firearm beneath his cloak. His weathered face was taut with tension, eyes scanning every movement, every subtle shift in the killer's posture. He was the streetwise sentinel, the grounded force amid the swirling chaos, and tonight, his loyalty was a fragile but vital shield. The killer's smile, concealed behind the cracked mask, was a razor's edge. "You think you understand the rules?" "The masks." "No, you are only beginning to see the truth beneath the surface. But can you face it?" Elias stepped closer, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by the night. "What do you want from me?" His voice was steady, but inside, the storm raged. "To see you unravel. To watch your carefully constructed self crumble like the fragile mask you wear. You chase shadows, Elias, but the darkest shadow is always within." The words struck like a blow, reverberating through the hollow chambers of Elias's mind. He fought the rising tide of doubt, the gnawing fear that the lines between hunter and hunted, friend and foe, were dissolving into the mist. Livia's voice cut through the tension. "The masquerade is more than a festival. It's a mirror reflecting the city's sins and yours." Marco's grip tightened on his weapon, ready for the inevitable clash. But for now, words were the weapons of choice. The killer's gaze bored into Elias's soul, the enigmatic glint behind the mask offering no answers, only riddles. Tonight, the penultimate mask falls, but the final face. That is a secret yet to be revealed. Elias squared his shoulders, the weight of the night pressing down but failing to break him. "Then I'll be ready." As the killer slipped back into the shadows, the fragile veil of trust and identity hung by a thread, stretched taut by the relentless ticking of the clock. The masquerade continued around them, an endless dance of masks and lies, where every truth was a half-truth and every friend might be the next face to betray. Elias's mind churned with the killer's words, the echo of his own fractured past intertwining with the present danger. The penultimate mask had fallen, but the final reveal loomed just beyond the horizon, an abyss where identity, trust, and survival would collide in a desperate gamble. He turned to Livia and Marco, their faces obscured by masks, yet etched with the same grim determination. The night was far from over, and the true game was only just beginning. "Prepare yourselves," Elias said, voice low and resolute. "The last mask waits for no one." The moonlight faded behind a gathering cloud, plunging the courtyard into deeper shadow. And as the night swallowed the masquerade whole, The fragile dance of identity and betrayal reached its most harrowing crescendo yet. Elias knew one thing with unshakable clarity: when the final mask fell, nothing would ever be the same again. The midnight ball had begun. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and sandalwood, mingling with the faint metallic tang of anticipation and danger. Inside, the vast ballroom pulsed with life, a maze of swirling silk, shimmering jewels, and faces concealed behind masks of painted porcelain, lace, and feathers. Elias adjusted the sleek black mask that hid his identity, the cool weight settling against his skin, a familiar comfort amid the chaos. Every detail of his tailored suit was chosen to blend elegance with the shadows, a deliberate balance between visibility and concealment. His gray eyes scanned the sea of guests, each one a cipher wrapped in layers of deception. The killer was here somewhere, wearing a mask that changed the narrative with every moment. The music swelled, a haunting waltz that echoed off frescoed ceilings and gilded walls. Laughter and whispered conversations floated through the air like smoke, elusive and shifting. Elias moved cautiously into the throng, his senses alert to every gesture, every glance. The masquerade was a living puzzle, a dance of identities where trust was a currency too costly to afford. He spotted Livia Conti near a cluster of Venetian nobles, her presence commanding despite the delicate gold and black mask that framed her striking dark hair. Her eyes met his briefly, a flicker of recognition and something unreadable passing between them. Elias nodded subtly and made his way toward her, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. "Elias," Livia whispered as he reached her, her voice low and guarded. "The tides are shifting. The secret society holds sway over more than just the festival tonight." He frowned, absorbing the weight behind her words. "And the killer?" She hesitated, glancing around as if the very walls had ears. "The final mask is close, I can feel it. But I don't know who wears it." Their exchange was brief but charged, an uneasy alliance forged in shadows and necessity. Elias sensed the dual edges of Livia's loyalty, the conflict between family legacy and the urgent need to end the nightmare. From the corner of his eye, Elias caught movement, Marco Bellini, rugged and unyielding, cutting through the crowd with the steady focus of a man seeking redemption. His simple half-mask did little to soften the sharp lines of his face or the determination burning in his eyes. "Marco," Elias called over the music, pulling him aside. "Any sign of our ghost?" Marco's voice was gravelly but resolute. "Not yet. But I'm watching every shadow, every smile." This city's secrets don't hide easily. Together they formed a fragile trinity, a coalition of necessity against the backdrop of shifting trust and looming betrayal. As the night deepened, Elias's gaze locked onto a figure moving across the ballroom floor. The mask was unlike any other, a dazzling creation of shifting hues and subtle patterns that seemed almost alive, flickering like a flame in the dim light. A chill ran down Elias's spine. This was the signature of the 13th mask, the killer's final guise. Heart pounding, Elias edged closer, the music swelling to a crescendo that matched the wild rhythm of his thoughts. Every step was measured, every breath calculated. The killer was near, and the final act of this deadly masquerade was about to unfold. Around him, the masked guests danced and mingled, oblivious to the deadly game playing out in their midst. The line between friend and foe blurred with every passing moment. Elias's grip on certainty slipped, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of a man on the edge. The midnight ball was no longer a celebration, it was a battlefield. The stakes had never been higher, and Elias knew that tonight masks would fall and truths would be revealed. But would he survive to see the dawn? The music shifted, a haunting melody that seemed to beckon him forward into the heart of the masquerade's dark soul. Elias took a steadying breath and stepped deeper into the labyrinth of secrets, his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows and the ever-changing faces. The hunt was on, the final mask awaited. And so, beneath the glittering chandeliers and amidst the swirling silks, the deadly dance began anew, each step drawing Elias closer to the truth and to the edge of oblivion. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars, their fractured light casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the marble floor. Music from a distant orchestra wove through the air, a haunting melody that underscored the tension vibrating beneath the surface of the masquerade. Elias Varga moved carefully through the crowd, each measured step a calculated risk. His eyes, sharp and gray beneath his own mask, searched relentlessly for the killer who had haunted his every waking moment for 30 nights. Tonight was the last night. Time had thinned to a razor's edge, every second weighted with the promise of finality. He paused near a marble column, the murmurs of laughter and clinking glasses swirling around him like a storm. The air was thick with perfume and whispered secrets, the scent of jasmine and old leather mingling with the faint tang of danger. His heart beat steadily, a metronome against the cacophony of noise and movement. Somewhere in this sea of shifting faces, the 13th mask lurked, an enigma wrapped in layers of deception and menace. Elias's gaze caught movement across the room. A figure emerged from the crowd, their mask an intricate lattice of black and silver, expressionless yet somehow terrifying, the killer. The 13th mask. Elias's breath caught as he closed the distance, every instinct screaming that this was the moment he had been preparing for, but dreading in equal measure. The killer's voice was a whisper, calm and cold, as they stepped into the shadowed alcove that framed the ballroom's grandeur. "You seek me, Elias, but what will you find when the mask slips?" Elias's eyes narrowed. Truth, for a brief, shattering instant. The killer's mask tilted, revealing a flicker of familiarity, a scarred jawline, the curve of a cheekbone, eyes that reflected the same haunted abyss he had seen mirrored in his own. Betrayal crashed over him like a tidal wave. The threads of trust he had clung to unraveled in a heartbeat. From the periphery, Livia Conti stepped forward, her presence both a shield and a dagger. Her eyes, dark and brilliant beneath her delicate Venetian lace mask, locked with Elias's. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling with conflicted loyalty. "There's more at stake than you know." Marco Bellini watched silently, his rugged face set in grim resolve. The partnership forged in reluctant trust now teetered on the edge of collapse. Words tumbled between them, accusations and confessions weaving a tapestry of deception and pain. The killer's vendetta was not just a game of death, but a reckoning rooted deep within Elias's fractured past. The masks were more than mere disguises, they were the fractured pieces of shattered lives and broken trust. Suddenly, the killer lunged, a flash of motion against the ornate backdrop. Elias dodged, the cold steel of a concealed blade grazing past him, a whisper of death narrowly avoided. The crowd gasped, frozen mid-step as chaos erupted. Masks fell like autumn leaves, faces exposed under the cold Venetian moonlight that spilled through the towering windows. The fragile facade of the masquerade shattered. Elias grappled with the killer, the struggle a desperate dance of survival and revelation. Each moment stretched taut, every breath a gamble. The killer's true face emerged, scarred, tormented, a mirror of Elias's own haunted soul. The confrontation was not just a battle of bodies, but of truths long buried beneath layers of lies. In the end, Elias stood victorious yet hollow, the price of unmasking the killer etched deep into his psyche. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, and the fragile threads of trust lay in ruins around him. As the last mask fell, so too did the illusions that had sustained him. The masquerade's music faltered, the revelers' eyes wide with shock and fear. Elias's gaze swept the room, now a gallery of exposed faces, each one a story of deception and survival. The deadly puzzle was solved, but the cost was immeasurable. As the first light of dawn crept over Venice's canals, Elias felt the weight of loss settle over him. The killer was unmasked, but the shadows within himself remained. The masquerade had ended, but the haunting fragility of identity lingered like a ghost in the Venetian mist. And somewhere, beneath the surface of the city's beauty and decay, the question still echoed, who could ever truly be trusted when no one was who they seemed? Elias's story was far from over. The masks had fallen, but the game played on. Elias Varga stood at its center, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the figure across the room. The 13th mask, a phantom who had slipped through 13 nights of shifting faces and whispered deceptions, now stood revealed by nothing more than the sharp edge of Elias's will. Every muscle in Elias's body hummed with tension, a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. Around them, the murmurs of the masquerade attendees hushed to a brittle silence, the air thick with anticipation and dread. The music, once a lilting waltz, faded into a ghostly echo, swallowed by the weight of the moment. Elias's heart beat not with fear, but with a grim resolve. This was the endgame, the final act in a play where masks had become weapons and truths were the deadliest disguise. The figure before him was draped in a black velvet cloak, the intricate mask a delicate lattice of silver filigree hiding a face that had worn countless guises over the past 30 nights. Elias moved forward, each step measured, his voice low but cutting through the silence. It ends here, no more masks. No more lies. The 13th mask's eyes glimmered with a cruel amusement, the faintest curve of a smile tugging at the lips behind the mask. You think you know me, Elias, but you only see your own reflection. A flicker of recognition pierced Elias's defenses. The words echoed with a familiarity that chilled him, unraveling threads of memory he had long buried. This was no mere killer. This was a shadow cast from his own past, a living manifestation of all the betrayals and failures that haunted him. With a sudden, swift motion, Elias reached out and tore the mask away. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to fracture the very air. Beneath the mask was a face both unfamiliar and achingly known, an echo of his own, scarred and weary, eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and sorrow. You, Elias whispered, disbelief mingling with rage. All this time, you were the ghost haunting me. The killer's voice was a rasp, layered with pain and bitterness. I am the mirror you refused to face, the betrayal you buried beneath your own lies. The room seemed to tilt as the truth crashed down like a storm. Livia Conti stepped forward, her eyes flickering with conflicted emotions, loyalty, regret, and something that resembled hope. Marco Bellini's rugged face was set in grim determination, the weight of past mistakes and hard-won redemption evident in his stance. Elias felt the crushing weight of revelation settle over him. The killer was not just an enemy to be hunted, but a reflection of his own fractured self, the embodiment of every secret he had tried to conceal. A tense silence stretched between them before the killer lunged, desperation fueling a final, violent gambit. But Elias was ready. Years of training, pain, and relentless pursuit crystallized into a single, decisive moment. The struggle was brief but fierce, ending with the killer subdued and the masquerade's deadly game at last concluded. As the crowd slowly exhaled, the fragile veneer of festivity cracked, revealing the raw wounds beneath. Elias looked around the faces once hidden behind masks, now exposed, yet none as haunted as his own. The victory was Pyrrhic, a bitter triumph that left him more isolated than ever. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around the ancient canals, the water reflecting fractured moonlight like shards of broken mirrors. Elias stood alone, the echoes of the masquerade fading behind him. The city was silent save for the distant lapping of waves against stone, a lullaby for a man whose identity had been torn apart and reshaped through fire. He thought of the colleague he had lost, the betrayals that had shaped him, and the killer who had forced him to confront the darkest parts of himself. The path ahead was uncertain, marked by the shadows of what had been uncovered. Yet, amidst the desolation, a fragile ember of resolve glowed, an unspoken vow to face whatever ghosts remained, unmasked and unyielding. The 13th mask was no longer a mystery, but the story it told was far from over. As Elias disappeared into the Venetian night, the question lingered in the stillness. How does one rebuild identity when every mask has been shattered? And with that, the masquerade's final secret slipped silently beneath the surface, leaving only the haunting echo of a man forever changed. Elias Vargas stood alone on a narrow stone bridge, the cold mist curling at his feet as he gazed down into the slow-moving waters below. The aftermath of the masquerade was a silence that felt heavier than any music or laughter that had filled the grand halls just hours before. Around him, the city was waking, but the echoes of what had transpired lingered like a stubborn fog. Fragments of discarded masks floated in the canal, their once vivid colors muted by the water, as if the city itself was swallowing the remnants of the deadly game. Elias's breath formed small clouds in the crisp morning air, each exhale a reminder of the fragile life he still carried. He reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing against the edges of a small, worn photograph, an image of a colleague lost long ago, a ghost from a past that had shaped his every step in this grim pursuit. The events of the past nights flooded back with relentless clarity, the shifting faces, the betrayals that cut deeper than any blade, the final confrontation that had stripped away illusions and revealed the raw core of truth beneath the masks. Elias's heart thrummed with a mixture of relief and an aching emptiness. He had stopped the killer, unmasked the 13th mask, but at what cost? He turned away from the water, footsteps echoing softly on the cobblestones as he made his way through the waking city toward the grand palazzo where the last shadows of the masquerade still clung to the walls. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of extinguished candles and faint traces of perfume, the remnants of opulence now tinged with loss. In a dimly lit corner, Livia Conti awaited, her silhouette framed against the fading tapestry of the night. Her eyes, vibrant yet weary, met his with a complexity that defied simple interpretation. The elaborate mask she had worn was gone, leaving her face bare and vulnerable, the same vulnerability Elias felt but dared not show. "It's over," she whispered, voice barely above the rustle of silk and distant church bells. Yet in her tone lay a hesitation, a question that hung unsaid between them. Elias nodded, unable to meet her gaze fully, for now. But the shadows don't vanish so easily. The masquerade ends, but the scars remain. Their alliance, forged in necessity and tempered by suspicion, had survived the crucible of the investigation, yet the wounds it left were raw. Trust, that elusive currency, had fractured and reassembled in strange new forms, leaving Elias uncertain of the ground beneath his feet. From the depths of the palazzo, footsteps approached. Marco Bellini, rugged and worn, entered with the quiet determination that had come to define him. His eyes, sharp beneath weathered brows, reflected the weight of the past days and nights. "We did what we could," Marco said, voice steady but carrying the gravity of their shared ordeal. "Venice will breathe easier, but the city's wounds run deep." Elias allowed himself a brief nod. The camaraderie forged in hardship, a fragile thread connecting them amid the ruins of betrayal and loss. The detective's presence was a reminder that even amidst chaos, alliances could endure and perhaps even heal. As the morning light grew stronger, flooding the vast hall where the masquerade had reached its deadly crescendo, the emptiness was palpable. The chandeliers hung motionless, their crystals catching the light like frozen tears. The echoes of music and laughter had long since faded, leaving behind only the ghost of a celebration that had turned into a nightmare. Elias's gaze swept across the room, memories flickering like candle flames, the dance of masks, the whispered lies, the sudden violence that had shattered the fragile peace. The masquerade was over, the players unmasked, but the questions lingered, haunting the edges of his mind like shadows refusing to dissipate. Who was he beneath his own mask? Could the fractured pieces of his identity ever be made whole again? And as Venice stirred to life beyond these walls, what future awaited a man who had glimpsed the abyss and survived, yet was forever changed? The city outside beckoned, its canals winding like veins through the heart of a place where appearances were deceiving and truth was a precious, elusive prize. Elias took a slow breath, steadying himself against the tide of doubt and despair. With one last look at the empty hall, he stepped into the morning light, ready to leave behind the masquerade and the ghosts it had awakened. Yet even as the city disappeared behind him, the questions remained silent, unyielding, and as haunting as the masks that had fallen. Elias Vargas stood at the railing of the ferry, the chill morning air tugging at the edges of his long coat. The city behind him was a fading silhouette, ornate rooftops, ancient bell towers, and the labyrinthine canals slowly swallowed by the quiet mist. Venice, with all its grandeur and secrets, was slipping away. Yet, as the ferry cut through the still waters, the weight of everything Elias had endured settled heavily on his shoulders. He tightened his grip on the railing, feeling the coarse metal beneath his fingers, a cold, unyielding anchor in a sea of uncertainty. The masquerade was over, the killer unmasked. but the victory felt hollow, a fragile triumph carved out of loss and betrayal. The 13 nights had passed, each one a torment of shifting faces, fractured truths, and the relentless ticking of time. Now, as the city's outlines blurred in the distance, Elias wrestled with the ghosts the masquerade had stirred within him. Behind him, footsteps echoed on the dock. He turned to see Livia Conti and Marco Bellini approaching, their faces free of masks but heavy with unspoken emotion. Livia's dark eyes held a mixture of relief and sorrow, while Marco's rugged features bore the fatigue of battles fought and alliances forged in uncertain ground. "This is it," Livia said softly, her voice barely carrying over the gentle hum of the ferry's engines. Elias nodded, his gaze dropping to the worn leather satchel at his side, the repository of clues, memories, and the burdens of a mission that had changed him. "It ends here, or it begins anew," he murmured, the ambiguity hanging between them like a fragile veil. Marco stepped forward, his voice gruff but sincere. "Venice won't be the same without you prowling its shadows." A faint, almost wry smile flickered across Elias's lips. "Nor I without its shadows." He glanced once more at the city, now a ghostly presence on the horizon. "Thank you, both of you, for the moments I could trust, for the fragments of truth we fought to uncover." Livia's glance lingered, her expression unreadable. "Trust is a rare gift in this city, Elias. Guard it well if you can." As they parted ways on the dock, the distance between them felt less like farewell and more like the closing of a chapter written in shadows and half-truths. Elias watched them recede into the awakening city, their footsteps swallowed by the cobblestones and the rising sun. Left alone, Elias wandered back through the empty labyrinth of Venetian streets. The fog curled like silent fingers around ancient columns and faded frescoes. Every echo, every whispered breeze seemed to carry fragments of the masquerade laughter and screams, whispered secrets and broken promises. He passed beneath archways draped in ivy, the scent of damp stone and salt water filling his lungs. The city was alive with memory, a living tapestry woven from countless faces, masks, and lies. Each step pulled him deeper into reflection. The faces he had hunted, the shifting identities of the 13th mask, were now imprinted on his mind like ghostly impressions. He thought of the friend lost, the betrayals that had cleaved trust into splinters, and the fragments of himself he had left scattered along the way. Reaching his hotel room, Elias paused before the cracked mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. His reflection shimmered, fractured by the web of fissures running across the glass. He stared into the fragmented, image-piercing gray eyes staring back from shards that refused to align. It was as if the mirror held the truth of his fractured identity, a man splintered by the past and the relentless pressure of the present. The distant ticking of a clock echoed through the room, a haunting reminder of time's inexorable march. Elias's fingers brushed the surface of the mirror, tracing the cracks as if trying to piece himself whole again. "Who am I now?" he whispered to the silent room. The question hung unanswered, a specter poised between past and future. The masquerade was over, but Elias's journey was far from complete. As the ferry carried him away from Venice, the city's fading silhouette seemed to whisper promises and warnings alike. In the depths of his being, Elias knew that the masks he'd worn, the lies he'd told, the truths he'd uncovered would linger, shaping what he might become. For now, all that remained was the quiet desperation of a man adrift, navigating the shifting tides of identity, trust, and survival. The story of the 13th mask had ended, but Elias's tale was only just beginning. And somewhere, in the shadows beyond the horizon, new masks waited to be worn. The ferry's engine thrummed steadily beneath his feet as Elias turned away from the window, the waning light casting long shadows across the sparse cabin. He sank into a worn leather seat, the fabric creaking beneath him. His mind replayed the cascade of events, each murder, each betrayal, each fleeting moment of clarity and confusion. The weight of 13 nights pressed down, relentless and unforgiving. He closed his eyes, seeking solace in the dark behind his lids. Faces emerged and dissolved, Livia's sharp gaze, Marco's weary resolve, the killer's ever-changing masks. The lines between hunter and hunted blurred in his mind, the boundaries of self dissolving like mist. A soft knock startled him. The ferry attendant, a silent figure in uniform, gestured toward the horizon. "Venice fades, sir. New journeys begin." Elias nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yes. New journeys." He rose, stepping onto the deck once more. The cool air embraced him, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. The city was gone now, just a memory etched in water and stone. But within him, the masquerade lived on, a restless echo of identity's fragile dance. As the ferry sailed into the breaking day, Elias Varga faced forward, the uncertain path ahead beckoning him into the unknown. The masks had fallen. The game was over. But the man beneath them was still searching for truth, for redemption, for himself.